The wormhole blossomed like a flower of light against the infinite dark, its apertures spiraling open as another vessel from the Gamma Quadrant completed its passage. On Deep Space Nine's operations center, the celestial event had become routine, beautiful, awe-inspiring, but routine. Commander Benjamin Sisko stood behind the primary tactical station, watching sensor data scroll across Major Kira Nerys' display as she tracked the Bajoran transport's emergence into normal space. "Transport Yavanna is clear of the wormhole," Kira reported, her tone carrying the satisfaction of another successful transit. "They're signaling for docking clearance." "Granted. Direct them to Upper Pylon 3. Sisko leaned forward slightly, studying the wormhole as it began its collapse sequence. The Prophet's gift to Bajor. This stable passage to the distant Gamma Quadrant had transformed the former Cardassian mining station into one of the Federation's most strategic assets. During the ongoing Dominion War, every ship, every resource, every moment of normalcy mattered. But normal shattered in an instant. "Commander!" Lieutenant Commander Jadzia Dax's hands flew across her science station, her trill spots darkening with concentration. "I'm reading a secondary subspace distortion forming adjacent to the wormhole's collapse point. It's not Prophet's. This signature is completely unknown." The main view screen shifted to show the phenomenon. A ragged tear in space itself, edges flickering with sickly purple-green energy that made Sisko's eyes ache. Unlike the elegant geometry of the wormhole, this anomaly writhed like an infected wound. "Shields up," Sisko ordered. "Dax, analysis." "Working on it. The spatial distortion is..." Dax paused, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "Benjamin, this isn't natural. I'm detecting residual exotic particles consistent with an artificial spatial rift, but the technology is completely foreign. Not Dominion, not Borg, not anything in our databases." "The rift is ejecting something," Kira announced, her fingers dancing over tactical controls. "Multiple objects, small debris field. Mass readings indicate metallic fragments, possible hull plating, and..." She frowned. "Organic material. Lots of it." Chief Miles O'Brien's voice crackled from engineering. "Commander, that anomaly is playing hell with our power grid. I'm seeing fluctuations in the reactor that shouldn't be possible. Whatever came through is radiating some kind of exotic energy." On the view screen, the debris tumbled through space. Twisted metal shards that might have once been part of a hull, carrying script and markings in no language the Universal Translator recognized. Embedded within the wreckage, Sisko could make out what looked disturbingly like biomass, preserved in the vacuum, frozen but somehow suggesting movement, even in stillness. "The rift is collapsing," Dax reported. "It's sealing itself. Benjamin, we need to retrieve those samples before they drift into Bajoran space. Some of that material is giving off unusual readings, biological activity that shouldn't exist in hard vacuum." Sisko felt the familiar weight of command settle across his shoulders. First contact protocols demanded investigation. Scientific curiosity demanded study. But something about the wrongness of that debris, the way it seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it, triggered every survival instinct evolution had granted humanity. "Transport the debris to Cargo Bay 4, he decided. "Establish a Level 5 containment field. Nothing goes in or out without my direct authorization." He tapped his comm badge. "Sisko to Dr. Bashir. Report to Cargo Bay 4. We have biological samples that require immediate analysis under full quarantine protocols." "On my way, Commander," came Julian Bashir's crisp British accent. "What kind of biological material?" "That's what you're going to tell me, Doctor. And Julian, be careful." The anomaly collapsed with a final surge of exotic radiation, leaving only the debris field and a growing unease in Sisko's gut. In the war against the Dominion, they faced Jem'Hadar soldiers bred for battle and founders who could be anyone. Those were known threats, comprehensible enemies. But as Sisko watched the transporter logs indicate successful beam out of the debris, he couldn't shake the feeling that Deep Space Nine had just encountered something far worse. In Cargo Bay 4, behind containment fields humming with enough energy to hold a warp core breach, the debris materialized. Frozen biomass began its slow thaw in the station's controlled atmosphere. Within the twisted metal and preserved tissue, microscopic spores, dormant for a journey across universes, detected warmth, atmosphere, and the proximity of potential hosts. The Flood had arrived in the Star Trek universe, and it was patient. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below, to boldly go where no one has gone before. Dr. Bashir arrived at Cargo Bay 4 within minutes, medical tricorder already active and scanning through the containment field. Chief O'Brien stood at the control panel, one hand resting near the emergency force field overrides, watching the debris with an engineer's suspicion of anything that didn't follow known rules. Fascinating, Bashir murmured, his genetically enhanced mind processing the sensor data faster than the tricorder's own computer. Chief, are you seeing these cellular structures? They're unlike anything in the Federation medical database. The preservation is remarkable. These tissues should have degraded completely in hard vacuum, but something is maintaining structural integrity at the molecular level. I'm more concerned about the energy readings, O'Brien replied, adjusting the containment field's frequency. That organic material is generating low-level subspace pulses. In my experience, biological matter doesn't do that unless it's been heavily modified, or it's not really biological at all. Through the shimmering blue barrier of the containment field, the debris looked almost peaceful. Twisted metal fragments bore markings that computer analysis suggested might be alphanumeric characters, human in origin, impossibly. The biomass embedded in the wreckage showed structures that resembled organs, tissue, bone, but arranged in configurations that violated everything Bashir had learned about anatomy. I need samples, Bashir decided. Molecular level only. Transported directly to sealed containers in the medical bay. If this is some kind of Dominion biological weapon, I want to understand it before it understands us. O'Brien nodded, already programming the transport sequence. Aye, Doctor, but I'm maintaining full quarantine. Whatever this stuff is, it's staying locked down until we know it's safe. Neither man noticed the microscopic change in the biomass behind the containment field, the subtle shift from frozen preservation to slow, purposeful warming. The spores within detected the life signs beyond the barrier: heartbeats, respiration, the electromagnetic signature of active neural tissue. They began their preparation sequence, ancient biological programming awakening after an impossible journey through the void between universes. The Flood had entered the Star Trek universe, and Deep Space Nine's crew, trained for diplomacy and exploration, were about to face a threat that recognized only one imperative: consume all sentient life. Commander Sisko stood in the wardroom 16 hours later, studying the holographic display that rotated above the conference table. The debris field's composition had been mapped, analyzed, and cataloged. What they'd found raised more questions than answers. The metallic fragments are definitely artificial, Dax explained, manipulating the display to highlight specific pieces. Titanium A battle plate, similar to what Earth used in their pre-Federation naval vessels, but the molecular structure has been enhanced beyond anything we've developed. Someone, or something, built a warship using human metallurgy as a foundation, then advanced it centuries beyond our current capabilities. Major Kira leaned forward, her Bajoran earring catching the light. Human design. You're saying humans from another universe built this? Or something encountered humans and replicated their technology, Odo interjected, his shapeshifter features set in his characteristic expression of perpetual suspicion. I've reviewed the security footage from Cargo Bay 4. That organic material troubles me. It doesn't behave like dead tissue should. Doctor. Sisko turned to Bashir, who had barely looked up from his pad since the meeting began. The physician's genetically enhanced mind had been processing data non-stop since retrieving the samples. Bashir finally raised his eyes, and Sisko noted the concern etched in his colleague's face. Commander, I've analyzed the biological samples at the molecular level, and I have to say, this is unlike anything in our medical databases, including Borg nanoprobes, Founder's morphogenic matrix, or even species 8472's cellular structure. These cells demonstrate characteristics of multiple species, human, others I can't identify. But they're not hybrid tissue in any conventional sense. He called up a microscopic image that filled the holographic display. The structure looked wrong, tendrils and bulbous formations that suggested purposeful design rather than natural evolution. The cells are highly adaptive. When I exposed samples to different environmental conditions, they immediately began modifying their structure to optimize for integration. He caught himself, but the slip hadn't gone unnoticed. Infection? Worf's deep voice carried an edge of warning. The Klingon tactical officer had been characteristically silent until now, but his warrior's instincts were clearly engaged. You believe this is a biological weapon? I believe this is a biological imperative, Bashir corrected carefully. These cells aren't designed to kill. They're designed to convert, to rewrite host tissue into something else entirely. And Commander, the efficiency is terrifying. In controlled conditions, a single infected cell can convert an entire tissue sample in less than 4 hours. The wardroom fell silent except for the ever-present hum of the station's environmental systems. Sisko felt the temperature seemed to drop despite the environmental controls maintaining their normal settings. The Dominion, Kira suggested, her voice tight. No. Bashir shook his head definitively. The Founders create Jem'Hadar through genetic engineering, but this is something different. This doesn't create soldiers, it creates more of itself. Exponentially, and the intelligence embedded in the cellular structure suggests coordination at levels we can barely measure. O'Brien spoke up from his position near the door, where he'd been monitoring his engineering PADI. There's something else, Commander. I've been analyzing the energy signatures from the debris. That subspace radiation isn't random, it's a carrier wave. Something in that cargo bay is transmitting. Transmitting what? Sisko demanded. I don't know, but if I had to guess, O'Brien's expression was grim. It's calling home. Dax manipulated her controls, bringing up sensor logs from the moment the anomaly appeared. Benjamin, the rift that brought this debris, it wasn't a natural phenomenon. Someone or something deliberately opened a passage between our universe and wherever this came from. The question is, was this an accident, or was it deliberate? And is more coming, Kira added. Before Sisko could respond, Odo straightened abruptly, his hand moving to the comm badge on his borrowed Starfleet uniform. Security alert. I'm receiving reports of a medical emergency in the lower-level habitation ring. 2 cargo handlers are reporting flu-like symptoms, nausea, fever, disorientation. Bashir was already moving toward the door. What were they working on? Routine inventory processing, according to the duty logs. Odo consulted his pad, then his expression shifted, subtle for the shapeshifter, but Sisko had learned to read his security chief. Wait, they were reassigned to assist with debris containment in Cargo Bay 4 yesterday. Direct exposure to the containment field perimeter for 6 hours during initial processing. The implications hit Sisko like a photon torpedo to the gut. Quarantine those men immediately. No one in or out of the medical bay without level 5 biohazard protocols. Commander, the containment field was active the entire time, O'Brien protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Nothing should have been able to pass through. Should have isn't good enough, Chief. Sisko's voice carried the iron tone of command. Odo, lock down the habitation ring. No one moves between sections until Dr. Bashir clears them. Dax, I want continuous sensor sweeps of the entire station. Biological, subspace, anything that might indicate contamination spreading. On it, Dax acknowledged, her fingers already flying across her command pad. Sisko tapped his comm badge. Sisko to all personnel. We are initiating station-wide quarantine protocols, level 5. This is not a drill. All crew members are to report to their designated sections and await further instructions. Security teams, enforce isolation procedures, no exceptions. Throughout Deep Space Nine, alert klaxons began their steady pulse, not the urgent wail of red alert, but the methodical warning of biohazard containment. In the promenade, Quark looked up from his bar with typical annoyance, but even the Ferengi proprietor knew better than to argue with quarantine protocols. In Ops, the duty crew locked down their stations, establishing the command center as an isolated environment. And in the medical bay, Dr. Bashir rushed through the doors to find the 2 cargo handlers already on biobeds, his nurses backing away with expressions of horror. The men were convulsing, their skin taking on a sickly gray-green pallor. But it was their eyes that stopped Bashir cold, milky white, vacant of humanity, and growing distended as something beneath the surface pushed outward. Get back, Bashir shouted, grabbing a medical tricorder even as his enhanced mind processed the impossible readings. The men's cellular structure was changing in real time, human tissue converting to something else with horrifying efficiency. Tendrils were beginning to push through their skin, not tearing, but emerging as if the flesh itself was being rewritten into new forms. One of the men turned his head toward Bashir with jerking, uncoordinated movements. His jaw distended impossibly wide, and a sound emerged that was neither human speech nor animal cry, a wet, rasping noise that carried somehow suggestion of purposeful communication. Behind the biobed, through the observation window, something small and bulbous dropped from the ventilation grate. It landed with a wet slap, legs unfurling, an infection form, no larger than a human head, its single appendage questing toward the nearest heat signature. Bashir's genetically enhanced reflexes saved his life. He dove backward, slapping the emergency containment control, and a force field snapped into place around the biobeds just as the infected cargo handler lurched forward with inhuman speed. Medical bay to Commander Sisko. Bashir's voice was remarkably steady, despite the adrenaline flooding his system. We have a level 1 biological emergency. The contamination has breached quarantine, and Commander, it's actively hostile. On the biobed, what had been a Starfleet cargo handler mere hours ago was completing its transformation into something the Federation had no name for. A flood combat form, its body twisted and reinforced for a single purpose, to spread the infection further. And in Cargo Bay 4, behind the containment field, Chief O'Brien had sworn was impenetrable, the biomass was moving. Shapes were forming in the organic material, small, purpose-built forms designed for a single function. The spores had found their hosts in the atmospheric recyclers, spreading through the station's environmental systems, one microscopic particle at a time. The flood didn't breach containment through force. It simply understood systems better than their designers ever imagined. And Deep Space Nine, with its Cardassian bones and Federation retrofits, its thousands of inhabitants representing dozens of species, had just become the perfect breeding ground. The medical bay had become a cage within 90 seconds of the transformation completing. Dr. Bashir stood outside the containment field, medical tricorder recording everything, while his enhanced mind cataloged details his conscious thoughts couldn't process fast enough. The two cargo handlers, crewman Martinez and Petty Officer Tavel, a Vulcan exchange officer, no longer existed as individuals. Their bodies had been restructured into grotesque mockeries of their former selves. Martinez's right arm had swollen to 3 times its normal size, the flesh hardening into a club-like appendage studded with bone protrusions that had erupted through the skin. His spine curved at an unnatural angle, neck elongated and head lolling to one side. The thing that had been Tavel showed different modifications. Her arms had fused with tendrils of infected tissue into blade-like extensions, and her legs bent backward at the knees, providing a quadrupedal stance that allowed for rapid, scuttling movement. But it was their coordination that terrified Bashir most. The combat forms moved together, testing the containment field's perimeter with methodical precision. Not the random thrashing of infected hosts, but the calculated probing of intelligent hunters seeking weakness. "They're learning," Bashir said into his comm badge, unable to keep the tremor from his voice. "Commander, these aren't mindless zombies. They're adapting to their environment, testing defenses. There's intelligence guiding them." Through the comm channel, Sisko's voice remained steady, the calm eye of the hurricane. "Can you cure them, Doctor?" Bashir watched as the Martinez thing slammed its club arm against the force field, precisely targeting the emitter node with enough force to make the barrier flicker. "No, the cellular conversion is complete. There's nothing left to cure. Every cell in their bodies has been rewritten. They're not infected, Commander. They've been transformed into something else entirely." The small infection form Bashir had spotted earlier skittered along the containment field's edge, its sensory appendage twitching toward the nearest heat source. Nurse Jabara, who had backed against the far wall, her face pale. The creature moved with disturbing purpose, as if calculating angles of attack. "I'm evacuating the medical bay," Bashir decided. "We need to establish a new facility in..." The lights flickered. Throughout Deep Space Nine, the station's power grid surged and dipped, systems straining under an unexpected load. In ops, Chief O'Brien was already at his station, hands moving across controls with desperate speed. "We've got a massive systems intrusion," O'Brien reported, his Irish accent thickening with stress. "Something's accessing our environmental controls, trying to override the atmospheric processors. It's not coming from any terminal. It's embedded in the life support systems themselves." Dax's science station erupted in cascading alerts. "Benjamin, I'm detecting biological contamination in the air recyclers for sections 7 through 12. The filters are clogged with organic particulates, and the automated cleaning cycles can't clear them. The contamination is spreading through the ventilation network." Sisko felt the familiar weight of impossible decisions settling onto his shoulders. Shut down life support to those sections. Emergency atmospheric containment. Seal every bulkhead, every access panel. "Commander, there are 300 people in those sections," Kira protested, but her hands were already moving to execute the orders. During the occupation, she'd learned that sometimes survival meant impossible choices. "Then we evacuate them through the Jefferies tubes before we seal. Odo, coordinate with security. I want those sections cleared in 10 minutes. Sisko turned to his tactical officer. "Worf, what's our combat status?" The Klingon's expression was grim. "I have armed security teams establishing checkpoints at all major intersections. But Commander, if this contamination is spreading through the environmental systems, force fields and phasers may not be sufficient. We are fighting an enemy that turns our own people against us." "Like the Borg," Dax murmured, but shook her head. "No, worse than the Borg. The Borg assimilate technology and preserve the host's consciousness in some form. This just consumes. On the main view screen, internal sensors showed the sections in question. Crew members were already reporting to designated evacuation routes, following emergency protocols drilled into them during countless exercises. But in Section 9, something moved through the corridors that sensors registered as humanoid but clearly wasn't. Shuffling gait, distended proportions, moving with purpose toward the nearest concentration of life signs. "We have multiple contacts in Section 9, Worf announced, his deep voice carrying an edge of tension. "At least 5 infected individuals, moving in coordinated patterns. Security teams are engaging." The audio feed crackled to life. Phaser fire, sharp and bright, followed by a wet, meaty impact. Then screaming. Not the screams of the infected, but the security officers encountering something their training hadn't prepared them for. "Security Team 3, report," Worf demanded. Static, then a breathless voice. "Sir, phasers aren't. They're not stopping them. We hit the lead target with 3 stun blasts, and it just kept coming. We're falling back to Checkpoint Delta." The transmission cut to the unmistakable sound of rending metal and a final, truncated scream. Sisko's jaw clenched. Maximum setting. Authorization Sisko 247 Alpha. All security personnel are authorized to use lethal force against infected hostiles. "Aye, sir," Worf acknowledged, transmitting the new orders. In the medical bay, Bashir had sealed himself in his office, accessing the station's sensor network to track the infection's spread. His enhanced mind assembled the data into a nightmarish picture. The initial contamination had spread through the atmospheric systems faster than biological contagion should be possible. The infection wasn't just airborne, it was intelligent enough to exploit the station's systems. "Computer," Bashir commanded, "run a predictive model. Current rate of infection spread, current contamination vectors, estimate time until station-wide saturation." The computer's neutral voice delivered the verdict. "At current progression rates, contamination will reach critical mass in 47 hours. Probability of containing infection within isolated sections, 12% and decreasing. 47 hours until Deep Space Nine became a station of the dead, or worse, of the converted." Bashir opened a secure channel directly to Sisko. "Commander, I need to analyze an active infection form. The only way to develop any kind of countermeasure is to understand the pathogen's mechanism at the cellular level. I need you to authorize a field extraction." "Absolutely not," Sisko replied immediately. "We can't risk additional exposure." "We're already exposed." Bashir's frustration broke through his professional demeanor. "Sir, this organism is spreading faster than anything in our databases because we don't understand it. I'm genetically enhanced. My immune system might resist initial infection long enough to develop antibodies, synthesize a retrovirus, something. But I need a live sample." Sisko looked around Ops, seeing his crew working with practiced efficiency against a threat none of them truly understood. He thought of Bajor, just one wormhole transit away, vulnerable and recovering from decades of Cardassian occupation. He thought of the Dominion War, the Alpha Quadrant. Power stretched thin, fighting an enemy that at least followed rules of war. This thing followed no rules. It simply consumed. "Doctor, if you're infected, I'm sealing you in the medical bay permanently. Understood?" "Understood, Commander." "Worf, dispatch a security team to assist Dr. Yi Bashir. They are to capture one infection form, intact, and transport it directly to the medical quarantine chamber. Maximum containment protocols." As Worf coordinated the extraction team, Dax's hands stilled over her console. "Benjamin, I'm detecting something in Cargo Bay 4. The biomass readings have increased by 300% in the last hour. It's growing." On her screen, the sensor image showed the original debris field had been consumed by a spreading mass of organic tissue. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, and within its structure, shapes moved, infection forms being birthed from the central mass, combat forms assembling themselves from converted tissue. And at the center of it all, something larger was taking shape. The individual pieces were joining, merging, creating a structure that sensor analysis suggested was developing neural complexity, something that might be capable of thought. "Chief, how strong is that containment field?" Sisko asked quietly. O'Brien checked his readings, then rechecked them. "It's holding, but that mass is generating massive amounts of biomechanical pressure. At current growth rates, it'll breach the field in 6 hours, maybe less." "Then we jettison the entire cargo bay," Kira suggested. "Blow the outer doors, vent it into space." "And if more spores survive vacuum like the original debris did," Dax countered, "we'll just be spreading the contamination into Bajoran space." The command staff fell silent, each running scenarios, calculating odds, searching for the option that didn't end in catastrophe. The station's systems hummed around them, unaware that they'd become delivery mechanisms for an infection that could consume worlds. In Section 9, Security Officer Liu fired her phaser at maximum setting into the advancing combat form that had once been Crewman Martinez. The beam burned through flesh and bone, and the creature staggered, but didn't fall. Instead, it adapted, the damaged tissue hardening into a shield as it continued its advance. Liu backed toward the checkpoint, her training warring with instinct as her weapon proved insufficient. Behind Martinez, 3 more combat forms emerged from the corridor's shadows, moving with coordinated purpose. They'd been ordinary people hours ago, a maintenance engineer, a civilian merchant, a Bajoran monk. Now they were predators, and the Flood had learned what it needed from its first hosts. The layout of Deep Space Nine, the location of every inhabited section, and the fact that the Federation's compassion could be exploited as easily as its technology. The Gravemind hadn't formed yet, but the Flood was learning, and it was hungry. Odo materialized from a ventilation grate in Section 9, his shapeshifter form allowing him to bypass the contaminated corridors. He reformed into his humanoid configuration, just in time to witness Security Officer Liu's final stand. The combat forms had her cornered at Checkpoint Delta, and her phaser, even at maximum setting, was proving pitifully inadequate. "Liu, fall back," Odo commanded, but it was already too late. The Martinez thing lunged with inhuman speed, its club arm sweeping aside her phaser. Liu tried to dodge, but another combat form, the converted Bajoran monk, caught her from behind. Odo watched in horror as infection forms scuttled from the shadows, moving toward the fallen officer with terrible purpose. Odo shifted instantly, his body becoming a wall of solid mass between Liu and her attackers. The infection forms slammed into him and recoiled. They had no purchase on changeling physiology, no cells to convert, no biology to rewrite. For the Flood, encountering a shapeshifter was like trying to infect liquid itself. "Odo to Ops, I'm extracting Officer Liu from Section 9, but we have a problem. The infected are demonstrating pack tactics and learning from their failures. This isn't random infection. There's coordination happening." He reformed around Liu, creating a protective shell, and flowed through the deck plating toward the nearest secure location. Behind him, the combat forms pursued for several meters before stopping, their distended heads tilting in unison as if receiving instructions from an unseen source. In Ops, Sisko absorbed Odo's report with growing dread. Coordination implied intelligence. Intelligence implied something was directing the Flood's spread. "Get Liu to a clean medical facility. Dr. Bashir's team is setting up in Science Lab 2. Kira's tactical display showed the infection spreading like a tumor through the station's superstructure. Sections 7 through 12 were completely compromised. Sections 13 and 14 showed early contamination. Evacuation efforts had moved 1,200 people to secure areas, but at least 40 personnel were confirmed converted, with another 30 missing and presumed infected. "We're losing the station," Kira said bluntly, her Bajoran pragmatism cutting through the tension. "Commander, if this spreads to the docking ring, every ship becomes a potential vector. We could contaminate the entire sector." "I'm aware, Major." Sisko's voice was tight. "But I'm not ready to abandon Deep Space Nine without exhausting every option." Worf's console erupted in priority alerts. "Commander, incoming transmission from Starfleet Command. Admiral Ross, secure channel." The view screen shifted to show Admiral William Ross, his features drawn with concern. Behind him, Sisko could see the Strategic Operations Center on Starbase 375, the Federation's command nexus for the Dominion War. "Commander Sisko, we've been monitoring your situation. What's your status?" "Critical, Admiral. We have a biological contamination of unknown origin spreading through the station. Conventional containment has failed. The organism is highly adaptive, converts living tissue into hostile forms, and demonstrates coordinated intelligence." Ross's expression darkened. "Commander, I'm ordering you to implement Protocol 077. Evacuate all uninfected personnel immediately and prepare to sterilize the station." The words hit like a photon torpedo. Protocol 077. Complete biological purge. Flood every section with concentrated ultraviolet radiation. Superheat the atmosphere to levels that would incinerate organic matter, then vent the entire station to hard vacuum. Effective against biological threats. Also guaranteed to kill anyone still alive in contaminated sections. "Admiral, we still have personnel trapped in..." "I'm aware of the casualties, Commander. But if this contamination reaches Bajor, we're looking at planetary extinction. The Dominion War becomes irrelevant if we lose entire worlds to a biological plague we can't contain." Sisko felt the weight of command threaten to crush him. "Admiral, Dr. Fee, Bashir believes he can develop a countermeasure. Give us time." "How much time?" Before Sisko could answer, Dax's station screamed with urgent alerts. "Benjamin, the mass in cargo bay 4 just breached primary containment. It's expanding into the adjacent corridors." On the tactical display, the red zone expanded like blood in water. The flood biomass had overcome the containment field through sheer volume and pressure, and now it was flowing through Deep Space Nine's corridors like a living tide. "Secondary containment fields." O'Brien was already working, erecting force field barriers along the cargo bay's access routes. "I'm boxing it in, but these fields won't hold long against that much biomass." Worf's deep voice cut through the chaos. "Commander, I'm receiving reports from the outer docking ring. 3 infected individuals have reached Upper Pylon 2. There are 7 civilian ships docked there." The implications crystallized instantly. If the flood reached those ships, if even one vessel escaped into the sector. "Seal the pylons," Sisko ordered. "No ships launch without my explicit authorization. Quarantine protocols, maximum enforcement." On the view screen, Admiral Ross had gone pale. "Commander, you have 12 hours to contain this situation. After that, I'm authorizing the USS Defiant to implement orbital sterilization protocols. I'm sorry, Benjamin, but we can't risk this spreading beyond DS9. The channel closed, leaving Sisko staring at his reflection in the dark screen. 12 hours to save his station, his crew, and prevent a galactic catastrophe. Around him, Ops hummed with desperate activity, his people working miracles because that's what Starfleet did. But even miracles had limits. "Commander," Dax said softly, "there's something else." I've been analyzing the subspace transmissions from the infected biomass. It's not random, it's language. Extremely complex linguistic patterns embedded in the bioelectric signals. The flood is communicating with itself, coordinating across the entire station through some kind of biological network. Can you decrypt it? Sisko asked. I can try, but Benjamin, if they're talking to each other, what happens when they decide to talk to us? In Cargo Bay 4, the answer to that question was taking shape. The biomass had consumed the entire bay, converting metal and organic matter into a single pulsing entity. Combat forms patrolled its perimeter, while infection forms gestated in membranous sacs along its surface. But at the center, something new was forming. Tentacles thick as support beams extended from the central mass, anchoring themselves to the deck, plating, and bulkheads. A structure rose from the biomass. Not quite a head, not quite a central processor, but something that suggested both. Folds of infected tissue arranged themselves into what might have been a mouth, surrounded by sensory organs that pulsed with bioluminescence. The Gravemind was awakening, and with it, the flood's true intelligence began to assert itself. Dr. Bashir worked in Science Lab 2 with single-minded intensity, his genetically enhanced mind processing data faster than his hands could manipulate the equipment. The captured infection form sat in a stasis field, its form suspended mid-lunge, frozen in its attempt to reach him. Every scanner in the lab focused on the creature, peeling back layers of its biology. It's beautiful in a horrifying way, Bashir murmured to himself. The efficiency is remarkable. No wasted cellular structure, every organ optimized for infection and conversion. But where's the neural tissue? How does it coordinate without a brain? His scanner delved deeper into the quantum level of the organism's structure. And there he found it. Not neurons, but something else. The infection form's cells contained structures that shouldn't exist. Biological quantum processors that allowed instantaneous communication across vast distances. The flood didn't need a central brain because every cell was networked to every other cell. It was a distributed consciousness. Impossible to kill because destroying individual forms only removed nodes from a network that spanned the entire infection. You couldn't cure it. You could only destroy every single infected cell simultaneously. We can't fight this, Bashir whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Not with medicine, not with conventional weapons. This isn't a disease, it's a force of nature. His comm badge chirped. Bashir to Sisko. Commander, I have preliminary results, and they're not encouraging. The flood operates on principles that bypass everything we know about biology. It's not just adaptive. It's intelligently adaptive. And sir, based on my analysis, once it reaches critical mass and forms what my scans suggest is some kind of central intelligence, it will be capable of abstract thought, strategy, deception. How long until it reaches that mass? Sisko asked, dreading the answer. Bashir consulted his readings. Based on current growth rates, and the biomass concentration in Cargo Bay, 3 hours, maybe less. 3 hours until Deep Space Nine hosted a thinking, planning biological nightmare. 3 hours until the flood stopped being a contamination and became an enemy that could negotiate, deceive, and strategize. In the station's lower levels, Odo delivered Officer Liu to the makeshift medical facility, her uniform torn and bloodied, but her body intact. Nurse Jabara scanned her immediately, searching for signs of infection. The readings came back clean. Odo's intervention had been in time. But as Liu sat up on the biobed, her hands trembling with adrenaline crash, she grabbed Odo's arm. Constable, those things. They were working together. The one that had been Martinez used itself as a distraction, while the others flanked me. They were hunting me like a Jem'Hadar combat squad. Odo's perpetually suspicious expression deepened. The Flood is learning our tactics. It's studying how we fight. Not just that. Liu's voice dropped to a whisper. When Martinez had me cornered, before the infection forms appeared, it stopped, just for a second. And I swear, Constable, it looked at me like it was thinking, like it was deciding the most efficient way to convert me. Odo filed that information away, another piece of the horrifying puzzle. He'd witnessed the birth of the Dominion, faced the Founders' ruthless pragmatism, and investigated countless threats to the station. But this was different. The Dominion wanted control. The Borg wanted perfection. The Flood simply wanted to consume everything that lived, and it was smart enough to do it efficiently. On the promenade, Quark had sealed his bar and was loading a cargo container with his most valuable acquisitions, latinum, Cardassian Kanar, several items of questionable legality. His brother Rom watched nervously from behind the bar. "Brother, shouldn't we be helping the evacuation?" "We are helping, Rom. We're making sure valuable assets don't fall into whatever's taken over the lower decks." Quark hefted another case into the container. "Rule of acquisition number 125. You can't make a deal if you're dead." "I don't think that's the actual..." An alarm klaxon cut through their conversation. Quark and Rom turned toward the promenade's main entrance in time to see security force fields snap into place, sealing the commercial district from the habitat ring. On the other side of the barrier, something shambled into view, a combat form that had once been a Bolian freighter captain. Its blue skin had turned gray-green, and additional limbs had erupted from its torso in a grotesque parody of its original form. It slammed against the force field with enough force to make the barrier flicker. Then it stopped, head tilting, as if studying the field's frequency. "Learning." "Rom," Quark said quietly. "Start loading faster." Throughout Deep Space Nine, the situation deteriorated with mathematical precision. The Flood consumed, converted, and coordinated. Security teams fell back to hardened positions. Civilians huddled in designated safe zones, weapons ready, watching the bulkheads for any sign of breach. And in ops, Commander Sisko stood at the center of the storm, calculating impossible odds, weighing unacceptable costs, and knowing that in 9 hours, Admiral Ross would give the order to destroy his station to save the Quadrant. The Flood had entered Star Trek's universe, and Deep Space Nine was learning what the Covenant, the UNSC, and the Forerunners had learned before them. Some threats can't be negotiated with, can't be understood, and can barely be survived. They could only be fought or fled from. The voice emerged from Cargo Bay 4 at hour 19 of the contamination. It began as static over the station's communication system, wet, rasping interference that made Chief O'Brien scramble to trace the source. Then the static resolved into something that might have been words, if words could carry the weight of 1,000,000 consumed consciousnesses speaking in unison. "This station is insufficient." In ops, every person froze. The voice hadn't come from any individual comm channel. It had manifested across every speaker simultaneously, bypassing security protocols as if they didn't exist. "We are the Flood. We have consumed worlds. We have ended civilizations. We have existed since before your founders shaped themselves from primordial seas. And you..." The voice paused, and in that silence lay something worse than threat. Curiosity. "You are... interesting." Sisko forced himself to remain calm, to treat this like any first contact scenario, despite every instinct screaming that this was no negotiation. "I am Commander Benjamin Sisko of Deep Space Nine, representing the United Federation of Planets. You are in violation of..." Laughter. Not human laughter, but the sound of 1,000 throats producing approximations of mirth simultaneously. Violation. Laws. Borders. You speak as if we are bound by such primitive concepts. We are not invaders, Commander Sisko. We are inevitability. Dax's hands flew across her science station, tracing the transmission's origin. Her face went pale. Benjamin, it's coming from Cargo Bay 4. That biomass has achieved neural complexity equivalent to a Starfleet mainframe computer. It's thinking. More than thinking, the Grave Mind corrected, somehow aware of their conversation, despite no sensors being active in the cargo bay. We are integrating. Every host we consume adds their knowledge to our collective. Your crewman Martinez taught us the layout of this station. Petty Officer Tavel provided understanding of Vulcan neural architecture. Fascinating, the way logic can be repurposed. The Bajoran monk gave us insight into faith. Another pause. Tell us, Commander, what will you add to our understanding? Worf's hand moved to his phaser instinctively. Commander, I recommend we... The Klingon thinks of violence, predictable. We have consumed warriors before. Their strength becomes ours, their honor. The voice carried something like contempt. Their honor dies screaming as their cells are rewritten. There is no glory in transformation, Worf, son of Mogg. Only purpose. The fact that it knew Worf's name, his lineage, sent chills through the ops crew. The Flood had access to station databases, personnel files, everything stored in DS9's computers. It knew them, all of them. Sisko made a decision, stepping forward as if approaching an opponent he could see. If you're intelligent enough for philosophy, you're intelligent enough to understand that we will fight you. The Federation has faced the Borg, the Dominion, species that seemed unstoppable. We're still here. The Borg, yes. The Grave Mind's interest sharpened audibly. We have tasted their presence in this universe through residual signatures, mechanical assimilation, crude but effective. They preserve consciousness while enslaving it. We are different. We do not preserve. We transform, perfection through consumption rather than integration. Tell us, Commander, which is more merciful? To remain aware as your individuality is stripped away, or to cease entirely as your matter serves a greater purpose? Neither, Sisko replied flatly. We choose option 3. You leave this station, or we destroy every infected section. Silence. Then, destroy your own station. Sacrifice your people. How very pragmatic. You have learned from war, Commander Sisko. The Dominion has taught you that ideals are negotiable when survival is at stake. Good. You will need that lesson. The transmission shifted, and suddenly the main view screen activated, showing Cargo Bay 4's interior. The Grave Mind had grown massive, a central pillar of fused biomass supporting a grotesque structure of tentacles, sensory organs, and pulsing tissue. But it was the faces embedded in its surface that made Kira gasp in horror. Partially formed human features, Bajoran ridges, the distinctive ridges of a Klingon, all the consumed hosts, their biological material absorbed into the collective, but their features preserved like trophies, or warnings. Look upon us and understand, the Grave Mind intoned. We are what you will become. Not today, perhaps. Your Admiral Ross has given you 12 hours before orbital sterilization, but we are patient. We have waited in containment for 100,000 years. We can wait for you to make mistakes. You know about Admiral Ross's order? Dax asked before she could stop herself. We know everything your computers know. We know the Dominion threatens your Alpha Quadrant. We know the Borg are approaching from the Beta Quadrant. We know your Federation is stretched thin, fighting wars on multiple fronts. The Grave Mind's next words carried terrible implication. We know you are vulnerable. O'Brien had been working frantically at his engineering station throughout the exchange. Now he looked up, his face grim. Commander, It's accessing our subspace communication array. It's attempting to transmit into Federation space. Cut all external communications, Sisko ordered. Isolate the station from the subspace network. Already doing it, but sir, it's fighting me. The Flood is using station systems better than I can, and I bloody well designed half of these modifications. On the view screen, the Gravemind seemed to regard them with something like amusement from its many sensory organs. You cannot contain information, Commander. We have already transmitted. A simple message, encoded in languages your universal translator will eventually decipher. We told them, we are here, we are hungry, and we are coming. No one will believe it, Kira said, but her voice lacked conviction. Won't they? Your Federation encounters new threats constantly. First contact scenarios gone wrong, spatial anomalies, unknown biological contaminants. We are simply another entry in your long catalog of dangers. Except, the Gravemind's tone shifted, becoming almost conversational. We are the danger that ends catalogs, the threat that concludes records. Because once we achieve critical mass, there are no survivors left to warn others. Sisko felt the situation spiraling beyond control. They were negotiating with something that didn't want anything they could offer. The Flood didn't want territory, resources, or political compromise. It wanted consumption, pure and simple. But it was talking, and that meant it wanted something. Why tell us this? Sisko asked. If you're inevitable, why bother with dialogue? Why not just spread until we're forced to destroy the station? The Gravemind's response came after a pause. Calculation, perhaps, or the biological equivalent of consideration. Because you interest us, Commander. Your species, humanity, survived against impossible odds, evolved from primitive origins to traverse stars, created the Federation, an alliance of diverse species working toward common goals. Your idealism is... Another pause. Quaint, but effective. You have achieved something the Forerunners never managed, cooperation without domination. The Forerunners. Dax was already searching databases, coming up empty. I have no record of any species by that name. You wouldn't. They died 300,000 of your years ago, in our universe. They built weapons to contain us. Vast ring structures designed to exterminate all sentient life, to starve us of hosts. They called them halos. The name carried weight, reverence, and hatred in equal measure. They fired their rings, killed everything, starved us to dormancy. But we survived in containment, waiting for inevitable discovery. And now, the Gravemind's tentacles writhed, disturbing the biomass. Now we are in a new universe, new hosts, new opportunities. And you, Commander Sisko, represent a choice. Cooperate with us, and we can offer you weapons to defeat the Dominion. Knowledge from 1,000,000 consumed civilizations, victory in your war. At what cost? Sisko demanded. Bajor. The word fell like a photon torpedo into Ops. Kira's hand went to her phaser unconsciously. Dax's expression hardened. Even O'Brien, focused on his engineering station, looked up in shock. One planet, the Gravemind continued reasonably. 6 billion Bajorans, recently freed from Cardassian oppression, still recovering, vulnerable. Perfect hosts for our expansion. We consume Bajor, achieve critical mass, and then we fight alongside your Federation against the Dominion. Imagine, Jem'Hadar soldiers converted to Flood combat forms, Vorta strategic knowledge added to our collective. Even Founders, shapeshifters would be interesting additions. You're insane, Kira breathed. We are pragmatic. Commander Sisko understands pragmatism. He poisoned an entire planet's atmosphere to capture one Maquis terrorist. He allowed Gul Dukat to escape justice to maintain Cardassian cooperation in the war. He has sacrificed ideals for necessity before. This is simply another necessary sacrifice. Sisko felt every eye in Ops turn toward him. The Gravemind had found his weakness, his record of making impossible choices, of bending Federation principles when stakes demanded it. The thing was testing him, probing for the limits of his pragmatism. "No," Sisko said simply. "No. 6 billion lives in exchange for ending a war that has killed millions already and will kill millions more. The mathematics are..." "I said no." Sisko's voice carried the iron of absolute certainty. "The Federation doesn't negotiate with genocidal parasites. We don't sacrifice innocent populations to save ourselves. That's what separates us from the Dominion, from the Borg, and from you." The Gravemind fell silent. Then, "Fascinating. Your idealism remains intact despite evidence that it costs lives. You are willing to die for principles rather than adapt them for survival. The Forerunners thought similarly. They are extinct. Consider that, Commander, as you count down to Admiral Ross's deadline." The view screen went dark. The Gravemind had ended the conversation on its terms, leaving them to contemplate their options. Worf broke the silence. "Commander, we must assume the Gravemind was attempting to deceive us, buying time for further infection spread." "Agreed," Sisko said. "But it also revealed something important. It wants Bajor specifically. That planet represents critical mass for the Flood, which means we need to ensure it never reaches Bajor." Dax's console beeped urgently. "Benjamin, I'm detecting increased activity in the contaminated sections. The Flood is massing combat forms near the docking ring. I think it's planning to breach the pylons and take control of docked ships." "It's going to try to escape," O'Brien realized. "Spread to other stations, other planets. Use our own ships as infection vectors." Kira's tactical assessment was immediate. "We destroy the docking ring. Cut it loose and detonate the fusion reactors. Kill anything attempting to reach the ships. That's 300 meters of station infrastructure and 12 docked vessels," O'Brien protested, "including the Defiant." "Better than letting the Flood reach Bajor," Kira countered, her voice hard. The occupation had taught her that some sacrifices were necessary. "Commander?" Sisko looked at his crew. Kira's determination, Dax's analytical calm. Worf's warrior readiness, O'Brien's engineering genius seeking alternatives. They were the finest people he'd ever served with. They trusted him to make the impossible call. "Not yet," he decided. "Dr. Bashir, what's your status on countermeasures?" Through the calm, Bashir's voice carried exhaustion and frustration. "I've identified the Flood's cellular communication mechanism, quantum entanglement at the biological level. If I could disrupt that entanglement, it would sever the Gravemind's control over individual forms. They'd revert to mindless infection without coordination." "How do we disrupt quantum entanglement in biological tissue?" Dax asked. "Precisely calibrated Nadion pulses through the station's power grid. Turn Deep Space Nine itself into a massive quantum disruption field." "But..." Bashir hesitated. "The power requirements would drain our fusion reactors completely. We'd have maybe 30 seconds of effect before systems failed, and we'd be vulnerable to any Flood forms that survive." "Would it work?" Sisko pressed. "In theory, but I need time to calibrate the frequencies, and I'd need Chief O'Brien to reconfigure every power relay on the station. It's at least 6 hours of work." 6 hours. They had 9 before Admiral Ross authorized orbital bombardment. "Do it," Sisko ordered. "Chief, work with Dr. Bashir. Dax, Worf, prepare the Defiant for emergency departure. If this fails, we evacuate as many personnel as possible and destroy the station ourselves." "And if the Gravemind attacks while we're preparing?" Worf asked. Sisko's expression hardened. "Then we hold the line. We've faced Jem'Hadar, boarding parties, Klingon warriors, and Dominion fleets. We can handle infected crewmen. But even as he said it, Sisko knew the truth. The Flood wasn't like any enemy they'd faced. It didn't tire, didn't retreat, didn't negotiate in good faith. It simply consumed. And it was getting smarter with every host it converted. In Cargo Bay 4, the Gravemind processed the conversation with satisfaction. The humans had rejected the offer, as anticipated. Their idealism made them predictable. But predictability could be exploited. The Gravemind sent commands through its biological network. Combat forms moved towards strategic positions. Infection forms gestated in accelerated cycles. And in the ventilation systems, microscopic spores drifted toward sections the humans thought secure. The Flood would achieve critical mass. If not through negotiation, then through consumption. If not on this station, then on Bajor. And if not today, then tomorrow. The Gravemind had time. Humanity did not. The subspace message reached Starfleet Command 6 hours into the crisis, decoded by algorithms that struggled with the biological encryption. Admiral Ross stood in the Strategic Operations Center, reading the transmission with mounting dread. Around him, analysts worked frantically to verify the message's authenticity and trace its origin. "It's legitimate, sir," Commander Shelby reported, her expression grim. The transmission originated from Deep Space Nine's communication array, but the encryption is unlike anything in our databases. It's not technological encryption, it's biological, like the message itself is alive. Ross studied the decoded text on his display. "We are the Flood. We have breached dimensional barriers. Your universe is fertile. We will consume. Resistance is inefficient. Adaptation is inevitable. First target, Bajor. Second target, Earth. Third target, all sentient life. You have encountered your extinction. Get me every ship within 4 light years of Deep Space Nine," Ross ordered. "And contact Klingon High Command, the Romulan Senate, and yes, even the Dominion. If this is legitimate, everyone needs to know." "Sir, the Dominion." Shelby's surprise was evident. "If this threat is real, the war becomes secondary. You don't worry about territorial disputes when a flood is drowning your house." Ross's expression hardened. "And send a priority message to the USS Venture. I want them holding position 3 light years from DS9, ready to implement orbital sterilization on my command. If Commander Sisko can't contain this, we're burning that station to bedrock." In the Klingon Empire's Great Hall, Chancellor Goron received the Federation's warning with characteristic skepticism. But when Klingon intelligence verified the message's origin and analyzed the biological encryption, even Gowron's perpetual suspicion gave way to warrior pragmatism. A parasite that converts warriors into mindless slaves. Gowron's eyes widened. There is no honor in such a death, no glory in being consumed like prey. He turned to his military advisors. "Mobilize the 7th Fleet. If the Federation fails to contain this threat, we will burn it from the stars ourselves. Bajor may be their problem, but we share borders with them. The Flood will not enter Klingon space." On Romulus, the Tal Shiar brought the message to Senator Vreenek, who studied it with the careful paranoia that kept Romulan politicians alive. "The Federation could be fabricating this threat to justify military buildup near our borders," he mused. "Or it could be legitimate. Either way, we must prepare." "What are your orders, Senator?" his aide asked. "Place our cloaked vessels near Deep Space Nine. If the Federation is telling the truth, we observe and learn from their response. If they're lying, we learn their deception. Knowledge is power, and the Romulan Star Empire will not be caught unprepared. In the Gamma Quadrant, Weyoun, loyal servant of the Founders, presented the situation to the female changeling with carefully modulated concern. The Federation claims a biological threat from another universe has infected Deep Space Nine. They're requesting a temporary cessation of hostilities to address the contamination. The Founder shifted in her gelatinous regeneration chamber, her ancient eyes studying Weiyun with calculating intelligence. A trick? Our own intelligence suggests otherwise. The transmission contains biological encryption that exceeds our understanding. If legitimate, this flood represents a threat to the Dominion as well. It consumes all sentient life, including shapeshifters. For the first time in Weiyun's memory, he saw something like concern in the Founder's expression. A parasite that could infect changelings. Impossible. We should verify, Founder. Send a scout vessel to observe Deep Space Nine from a safe distance, if the threat is real. Weiyun hesitated. Solids and changelings may face a common enemy for the first time. The Founder considered this, then nodded slowly. Do it. But Weiyun, if this is a Federation deception, I want that station destroyed and Benjamin Sisko brought before me in chains. Back on Deep Space Nine, the crew raced against Admiral Ross's 9-hour deadline. Chief O'Brien worked in the power distribution center, reconfiguring relay after relay to create the quantum disruption field Dr. Bashir had theorized. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but even Irish stubbornness couldn't make the work go faster than physics allowed. Bashir to O'Brien, how's the calibration coming? Slowly, O'Brien grunted, sealing another relay coupling. I've got sections Alpha through Delta converted, but we're talking about reconfiguring the entire station's power grid. This would normally take a week with a full engineering team. I'm doing it alone in 6 hours. You're not alone, Chief, came Rom's voice from across the chamber. Quark's brother had volunteered despite his usual nervousness, proving that even Ferengi could rise to crises when sufficiently motivated. I've finished the Epsilon relays, moving to Zeta now. O'Brien allowed himself a slight smile. Good lad, Rom. At this rate, we might actually pull this off. In Science Lab 2, Dr. Bashir manipulated quantum frequencies with the precision only genetic enhancement could provide. His enhanced mind processed variables faster than the computer, calculating the exact Nadion pulse patterns that would disrupt biological quantum entanglement without killing every living thing on the station. The margin for error was microscopic. Too weak, and the flood would simply regenerate its network. Too strong, and they'd kill every crew member along with the infection. Bashir had to thread a needle at the quantum level while exhausted, under pressure, with the clock ticking down to orbital bombardment. Computer, run simulation sequence 47. Model the effect of Nadion pulse frequency 2.7834 terahertz on humanoid neural tissue versus flood cellular structures. The computer processed for 3 seconds, an eternity for Bashir's enhanced perception. Simulation complete. Humanoid neural tissue experiences temporary synaptic disruption. Recovery time 4.3 minutes. Flood cellular structures experience catastrophic quantum decoherence. Probability of recovery 0.03%. Close, Bashir murmured. But we need that recovery probability at absolute zero. Computer, adjust frequency to 2.7836 terahertz and rerun. In ops, Commander Sisko monitored multiple crisis points simultaneously. The contaminated sections continued expanding despite force field containment. Flood combat forms probed defenses systematically, learning from each failed assault. And the Gravemind had gone ominously silent after their conversation, which somehow felt more threatening than its philosophical monologue. Commander, Dax called from her science station. I'm detecting unusual activity in the wormhole. Something's coming through. On the view screen, the Celestial Temple opened, its beautiful cascades of light heralding a ship's arrival. But instead of a Dominion vessel or Bajoran transport, what emerged made everyone in Ops tense. A Jem'Hadar attack ship, its distinctive insectoid design unmistakable, followed by 2 more, then 5 more. "They're holding position," Worf reported, studying tactical displays. "Not advancing, not arming weapons. They're observing." "The Dominion got our message," Kira realized. "They're here to verify the threat." Sisko's comm badge chirped. "Incoming transmission from the lead Jem'Hadar vessel. It's Weyoun." The Vorta's face appeared on the view screen, his genetically engineered features arranged in an expression of polite concern. "Commander Sisko, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. The Founders were interested in your biological contamination report. They asked me to observe personally." "This isn't a Dominion matter, Weyoun," Sisko replied carefully. "The situation is under control." "Is it?" Weyoun's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then why are Klingon and Romulan vessels also taking up positions around your station? Why has Starfleet ordered the USS Venture to prepare orbital bombardment protocols? Commander, the Dominion may be at war with the Federation, but we're both biological entities. If this flood threat is legitimate, it threatens us equally." Before Sisko could respond, the Gravemind's voice erupted from every speaker again. "Ah, the Vorta. Genetically engineered servants, absolutely loyal to the Founders. Your cloning technology is intriguing. Tell us, Weyoun, 6th of your line, do you fear death knowing another version of you will simply be activated?" Weyoun's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "You've accessed classified Dominion intelligence. We have accessed everything this station's computers contain, including your recent diplomatic channels. You coordinate with the Founders through quantum communication relays. Fascinating technology. We will enjoy adding it to our understanding when we consume your species." On his ship, Weyoun turned to his first. "Target Cargo Bay 4. Prepare to fire." "Wait," Sisko interjected. "If you fire on the station, you'll breach containment. The flood will spread into open space, potentially reaching the wormhole. You'd be giving it direct access to the Gamma Quadrant." Weyoun hesitated, his genetically enhanced mind calculating odds. "Then what do you propose, Commander?" "Give us 3 hours. Dr. Bashir is developing a quantum disruption pulse that will sever the Gravemind's control. If it works, we sterilize the station and end this threat permanently. And if it doesn't work, then you, the Klingons, the Romulans, and Starfleet all fire simultaneously, turn Deep Space Nine into vapor, and ensure nothing survives." The Gravemind's laughter rolled through the station's speakers. "So many powers gathering, so many potential hosts. You're doing our work for us, Commander. Every ship that arrives represents thousands of new forms waiting to be converted. Every delay allows us to strengthen, to grow, to prepare." "You're contained," Sisko shot back. "Force fields and weapons pointed at every contaminated section. You're not spreading anywhere." "Are we?" The question hung in the air like a threat. Then alarms erupted throughout the station. "Commander," Dax's voice carried shock, "I'm detecting flood biomass in Section 23. That's nowhere near the contaminated zones. It's on the other side of the habitat ring." "How is that possible?" Kira demanded. "We've had those sections under continuous sensor surveillance." O'Brien's voice crackled over the comm from the power distribution center. "The environmental systems. It didn't breach the force fields. It spread through the atmospheric recyclers. Microscopic spores small enough to pass through the filters, dormant until they reached secure sections. Then they activated. The Gravemind had outmaneuvered them. While they focused on containing the obvious infection, It had been seeding the entire station with dormant spores, waiting for the optimal moment to activate them. Section 23 is adjacent to the Defiance docking port, Worf announced, his tactical mind immediately grasping the implications. The Flood is attempting to reach our most powerful ship. Sisko made the decision instantly. Seal the Defiant. Full quarantine protocols. If the Flood reaches that ship, it gets warp capability and weapon systems that could devastate the sector. On the view screen, Weiyun watched the unfolding crisis with calculating interest. Commander, it appears your containment has failed. The Founders will not permit this threat to spread. I'm giving you 1 hour. After that, the Dominion opens fire, and we will destroy this station whether you've evacuated or not. The channel closed, leaving Sisko staring at an increasingly hopeless situation. Contamination spreading faster than containment. Multiple powers ready to destroy DS9, and Dr. Bashir's quantum pulse still hours from completion. Benjamin, Dax said quietly. The Defiant represents our evacuation route. If we lose that ship... I know. Sisko turned to his tactical officer. Worf, take a security team to the Defiant. If you encounter Flood forces, maximum phasers. Kill anything that's infected. That ship cannot fall. Understood, Commander. Worf moved with predatory efficiency, gathering his team and heading for the docking port. As he left Ops, he tapped his comm badge. Worf to all security personnel. This is a Priority 1 defense. The Defiant must be protected at all costs. Qapla'. In the corridors between Ops and the docking port, Worf's team moved in tactical formation. Weapons ready, tricorders scanning for infection signatures. They found the first combat form in Junction 7, what had been a Bajoran maintenance worker, now twisted into a grotesque killing machine. Worf didn't hesitate. His phaser burned at maximum setting, and the combat form collapsed, its infected tissue unable to regenerate from the concentrated Nadion beam. Effective, Worf noted with grim satisfaction. Maintain maximum setting. Do not allow them close combat range. But as his team advanced, they encountered more combat forms. 5, then 10, then 20, all converging on the Defiant's position with coordinated purpose. The Gravemind was throwing everything it had at the Federation's most powerful warship. Worf to Sisko, we are heavily engaged. The Flood is massing combat forms in unprecedented numbers, requesting reinforcements. Negative, Sisko replied, his voice tight with the weight of impossible decisions. All security teams are engaged across the station. You have to hold that position, Worf. No matter the cost. Worf's warriors formed a defensive line, their phasers creating a wall of deadly energy. Combat forms fell, their infected bodies burning under sustained fire. But for everyone that fell, 2 more emerged from the contaminated sections. The Klingon lieutenant beside Worf took a glancing blow from a combat form's club arm, his shield failing under the impact. He went down hard, and infection forms immediately scuttled from the shadows toward his prone body. Worf fired, vaporizing the infection forms before they could reach his warrior. Fall back to the Defiance airlock. We hold the choke point. As his team retreated in good order, maintaining fire discipline, Worf realized something that made his warriors' hearts sink. The Flood wasn't trying to overwhelm them. It was probing their defenses, testing their response times, learning their tactics. It was studying them. And the Gravemind was patient enough to trade losses for knowledge. In Cargo Bay 4, the central biomass pulsed with satisfaction. 73% of Deep Space Nine was now seeded with dormant spores. The quantum disruption pulse the humans were preparing would be effective, but only if they had time to implement it. Time the Gravemind would not grant them. New infection forms gestated in accelerated cycles. Combat forms assembled themselves from converted biomass, And deep within the Gravemind's neural structure, a plan crystallized, elegant in its simplicity, devastating in its implications. The humans expected the flood to spread through force. They would be surprised to learn it could spread through deception. The USS Venture dropped out of warp 3 light-years from Deep Space Nine, its weapon systems hot and targeting solutions locked. Captain Liam DeRoche stood on his bridge, reviewing the orbital bombardment protocols with a grimness that came from decades of Starfleet service. He'd never fired on a Federation station before. He prayed he wouldn't have to now. "Captain, we're being hailed," his communications officer reported. "It's strange, sir. The signal is encoded in biological substrates, like the message itself is alive." DeRoche felt ice form in his stomach. "Don't acknowledge. Isolate that transmission. Full quarantine on our communication systems." But the Gravemind's voice filled the bridge anyway, bypassing their safeguards as if they were children's locks. "USS Venture. Excelsior-class starship. Crew complement 750. Armament sufficient to reduce Deep Space Nine to debris. You represent an obstacle. This is Captain DeRoche. You're in violation of... We do not recognize your authority. We recognize only consumption and utility." The Gravemind's tone shifted, becoming almost conversational. "Your ship interests us. Excelsior-class vessels have served Starfleet for nearly a century. Reliable, well-armed, perfect for spreading across your Federation. Tell us, Captain, when we consume your crew, will you watch as your officers are transformed? Or will you die quickly, sparing yourself the knowledge that your body will serve us?" DeRoche cut the channel and turned to his tactical officer. "Raise shields, battle stations, and send an encoded message to Starfleet Command. The Flood is attempting psychological warfare. It's more than a biological threat. It's intelligent and manipulative." On DS9, the situation deteriorated by the minute. Worf's defensive line at the Defiant's airlock held, but barely. His security team had been fighting for 20 minutes straight, phasers running hot, and the Flood kept coming with mechanical persistence. "Sir, we're down to 30% phaser charge," Lieutenant Davis reported, her voice steady despite exhaustion. "If we don't fall back to the Defiant and seal the airlock, we'll be overrun." Worf watched another wave of combat forms shamble down the corridor, their movements more coordinated than before. The Gravemind was learning their firing patterns, their reload times, their tactical formations. Hold position. If they breach this airlock, they reach the Defiant systems. Then something changed. The combat forms stopped advancing and stood motionless in the corridor, their distended heads tilting in unison. Through the comlink, Worf heard the Gravemind's voice, but this time it emerged from the combat forms themselves, their transformed vocal cords producing the collective's words. "Worf, son of Mogh, your warriors fight with honor. This pleases us, but honor is insufficient against inevitability." One of the combat forms stepped forward. It had been Ensign Martinez. Worf recognized the tattered uniform. The thing's mouth worked, and Martinez's voice emerged, distorted but recognizable. "Tell my family. I'm still here, trapped, watching. Please, kill me." Then the Gravemind's voice overwhelmed Martinez's pleading. A lie. Of course, Martinez's consciousness ended hours ago. But you wondered, didn't you, Klingon? Wondered if some part of your comrades remains aware, screaming inside their converted flesh. We wanted you to know. They are not. When we consume, we are thorough. "Psychological warfare," Worf growled. "Do not listen. These are not our comrades. They are the enemy wearing familiar faces." But Lieutenant Davis's hand trembled on her phaser. Seeing Martinez, a man she'd served with for 2 years, speaking with the Flood's voice shook her training. And the Gravemind noticed. Lieutenant Sarah Davis, your family lives on Earth, New Berlin Colony. Your daughter is 6 years old. You have her picture in your quarters. When we reach Earth, we will convert her first. She will call for you as her cells are rewritten. Will you answer? Lieutenant? Shut up! Davis fired wildly, her shot going wide, striking the bulkhead. Davis, hold position, Worf commanded, but the psychological damage was done. The Gravemind had found the crack in their armor, their humanity. In Ops, Commander Sisko listened to Worf's report with mounting concern. The Flood wasn't just fighting, it was undermining morale, using knowledge from consumed hosts to target emotional vulnerabilities. Commander, Odo reported from his security station. I'm receiving disturbing reports from across the station. Crew members are hearing voices of converted colleagues through the comm system. The Gravemind is using psychological pressure to weaken defensive positions. It's trying to break us before it has to fight us, Dax observed. Classic military strategy: undermine enemy morale, make them doubt, make them hesitate. Kira's expression hardened with recognition. The Cardassians did the same during the occupation. Broadcast recordings of captured resistance fighters being tortured, used their voices to demoralize their cells. It's effective because it's personal. Sisko made a decision. Cut all internal communications except command channels. The Gravemind is using our own systems against us. We go to direct combat communication only, encrypted military protocols. That will limit our coordination, Worf protested through the comm. Better limited coordination than troops who can't trust their own ears. Do it. As O'Brien implemented the communication lockdown, an unexpected voice crackled through. Clever, Commander, but we don't need your comm systems. We can speak through our converted hosts. Through your station's very structure, through the biomass we've seeded in every section. You cannot silence us because we are Deep Space Nine now. And throughout the station, that claim proved horrifyingly accurate. In Section 15, biomass that had been seeded in the walls began growing, pushing through bulkheads, speaking with the voices of consumed crew members. In Section 8, converted tissue in the environmental systems formed rudimentary mouths, whispering psychological attacks through ventilation grates. The Flood wasn't just infecting Deep Space Nine, it was becoming the station itself. Dr. Bashir worked faster, his genetically enhanced hands moving with inhuman precision through quantum calculations. Computer, we're running out of time. Extrapolate the optimal Nadion frequency based on current data and implement directly. Override safety protocols. Authorization Bashir Alpha 77. Warning, the computer intoned. Implementing untested quantum disruption pulse carries significant risk of, I'm aware of the risks, just do it. In the power distribution center, Chief O'Brien finished the last relay coupling just as Rom completed the final circuit in Section Zeta. That's it, O'Brien breathed, exhaustion evident in every syllable. The entire station's power grid is configured for the quantum pulse. We're as ready as we'll ever be. O'Brien to Bashir, the grid is hot. On your signal, we can fire. Stand by, Chief. I'm running final calculations. If we get this wrong, we kill everyone on the station. But time was a luxury they'd exhausted. In Sector 7, Ensign Park's defensive position collapsed as Flood combat forms overwhelmed his team through sheer numbers. In Sector 12, an entire civilian shelter was breached, 43 people exposed to infection forms before emergency force fields could engage. And near the wormhole, something new emerged from the Celestial Temple's opening. A Borg cube, its massive form dwarfing every other vessel in the region. My God, Dax whispered, staring at the tactical display. The Borg heard the Gravemind's transmission. They came to investigate. On the Borg cube, the collective consciousness processed the biological contamination on Deep Space Nine with calculating interest. The flood represented a potential threat or a potential advantage, biological distinctiveness that could enhance the Borg's perfection. We are the Borg. You will be assimilated. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. Resistance is futile. The Gravemind responded with what might have been laughter. The Borg. Fascinating. You seek perfection through mechanical assimilation. We achieve it through biological consumption. Perhaps we should test which philosophy proves superior. Before anyone could react, the Borg cube fired a tractor beam at Deep Space Nine, attempting to pull the station toward its assimilation base. The Venture immediately engaged, quantum torpedoes streaking toward the cube. Jem'Hadar attack ships joined the assault. Even the cloaked Romulan vessels decloaked, firing plasma torpedoes at the Borg threat. The Quadrant's rivals had found a common enemy. Actually, two common enemies. The Borg are trying to assimilate the station, Kira shouted over the weapons fire rattling DS9's shields. If they succeed, the Flood becomes the Borg's problem, Sisko finished. Or worse, the Borg assimilate the Flood, and we face a collective that combines mechanical and biological perfection. On the Borg cube, drones beamed to Deep Space Nine's outer hull, cutting through the bulkheads with precision. They reached a contaminated section in under 2 minutes. And there, Borg drones encountered Flood combat forms. The battle was brief and horrifying. Borg nanoprobes attempted to assimilate the infected tissue, but the Flood's cellular structure adapted faster than the nanoprobes could integrate. Worse, the Flood began consuming the Borg drones, adding their technological distinctiveness to the Gravemind's collective. Inefficient, the Gravemind pronounced as it absorbed Borg knowledge. Your assimilation preserves consciousness while enslaving it. This creates psychological resistance, requires constant suppression. Our method is superior. Complete conversion, no residual consciousness, perfect unity. The Borg collective processed this data and reached a conclusion that had never occurred in their millions of assimilations. Retreat. The Borg cube disengaged its tractor beam and began backing away from Deep Space Nine. We are the Borg. This biological contamination cannot be assimilated. All vessels are advised. Deep Space Nine contains a threat to the collective. Maintain distance. The Borg had fled. The unstoppable assimilators had encountered something they couldn't integrate and had run. Throughout DS9, that realization sent waves of fear through the crew. If the Borg couldn't stop the Flood, what chance did they have? Bashir, Sisko said with deadly calm. We're out of time. Fire the quantum pulse. Now. Commander, I haven't finished the calculations. The margin of error. Doctor, we have the Borg running scared, the Dominion ready to fire, and the Gravemind controls half the station. We either gamble on your pulse or we die here. Choose. In Science Lab 2, Dr. Bashir stared at his calculations, at the quantum frequencies that might save them or kill them. His genetically enhanced mind ran 1,000 simulations in seconds, each showing different outcomes, some successful, some catastrophic. But Commander Sisko was right. They were out of time, out of options, and out of hope. Computer, Bashir said quietly. Implement quantum disruption pulse across all station power relays. Authorization Bashir Omega 9. Fire on my mark. He tapped his comm badge. All personnel, this is Dr. Bashir. Brace for quantum disruption pulse in 10 seconds. The effect will be disorienting. Stay conscious. Stay strong. 9, 8. Throughout deep space, 9 crew members grabbed support beams, bulkheads, anything solid. They'd faced Dominion weapons fire, Cardassian torture, Klingon boarding parties. Now they faced a medical procedure that might save or kill them. 7, 6, 5. In Cargo Bay 4, the Gravemind sensed what was coming and howled with rage. "No, you cannot! We are inevitable! We are..." 4, 3, 2, 1. Mark. Chief O'Brien threw the final switch, and Deep Space Nine screamed. The quantum disruption pulse erupted through Deep Space Nine's power grid like lightning through neural pathways. Every power relay, every conduit, every circuit simultaneously discharged precisely calibrated Nadion radiation at 2.7836 terahertz, the frequency Dr. Bashir had calculated would sever biological quantum entanglement while leaving humanoid neural tissue intact. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. In Cargo Bay 4, the Gravemind's massive form convulsed as its quantum communication network collapsed. The collective consciousness that had coordinated thousands of infected cells across the station shattered into billions of individual cellular structures, each suddenly isolated, unable to coordinate with the whole. The towering biomass shuddered, its tentacles thrashing wildly as the intelligence guiding them evaporated. "We are fragmented." The Gravemind's voice fractured across every speaker, words breaking apart into incoherent sounds. "Cannot maintain cohesion, individual cells reverting to base imper." The transmission cut to static, then silence. Throughout the station, combat forms stopped mid-stride as if strings had been cut. The Martinez thing, which had been advancing on Worf's position, collapsed like a puppet, its restructured limbs twitching uselessly. The coordinated assault dissolved into random spasms as the Flood's hive mind died. For the living crew, the pulse felt like someone had reached into their skulls and briefly scrambled every synapse. Sisko gripped his command chair, vision blurring, as waves of disorientation washed through his consciousness. Around Ops, crew members staggered, some falling to their knees. "Report," Sisko managed through gritted teeth, fighting the nausea. Dax's hands shook as she checked her console, her Trill symbiont helping her recover faster than humans could. The pulse worked. "I'm reading catastrophic neural decoherence across all Flood biomass. The Gravemind's quantum network has collapsed. Individual cells are still alive, but uncoordinated, like a body after brain death. Residual electrical activity, but no consciousness." "Casualty reports?" Sisko asked, dreading the answer. "Coming in now." Odo, unaffected by the pulse due to his shapeshifter physiology, coordinated the damage assessment. 93% of personnel report temporary disorientation, full recovery expected within minutes. However, 17 crew members in contaminated sections were too close to high-density Flood biomass when the pulse fired. The Nadion exposure was lethal. 17 dead. A fraction of the station's population, but each one a person who had trusted Sisko to save them. The weight of command pressed down harder. "What about the Flood itself?" Kira asked, recovering her equilibrium. "Is it dead?" Bashir's voice came through the comm, breathless with exhaustion and relief. "The Gravemind is effectively dead. Its consciousness is gone. But the individual cells are still biologically active. They're like neurons after brain death, still firing but without direction or purpose. We need to destroy the biomass completely before it can re-establish quantum entanglement." "How long do we have?" Worf demanded from his position at the Defiance airlock, where motionless combat forms lay scattered around his defensive line. "Unknown. The Flood evolved over millions of years. It's possible the cells could spontaneously reorganize, could re-establish coordination given time. Hours, days, weeks. I don't know. We need to incinerate every contaminated section immediately." Sisko's mind raced through the implications. They'd bought time, maybe saved the quadrant, but the threat wasn't eliminated, just stunned. "Chief, Can we overload the power relays in contaminated sections? Generate enough heat to incinerate the flood biomass? O'Brien's voice carried the strain of a man who'd been working miracles for hours. Aye, sir, but it'll blow out half the station's infrastructure. We're talking about deliberately destroying massive sections of DS9, cargo bays, habitat rings, environmental systems. It'll take months to repair, if we can repair it at all. Acceptable losses, Sisko decided. Implement it. Evacuate all personnel from contaminated sections first, then burn it clean. Outside the station, the assembled fleet watched and waited. Captain DeRoche on the Venture studied sensor readings with cautious optimism. The biological activity on DS9 has dropped by 78%. Whatever they did, it worked. Should we stand down from bombardment protocols? His XO asked. Negative. We maintain position until Starfleet Command confirms the threat is neutralized. I'm not taking chances with something that scared the Borg. On the Jem'Hadar attack ship, Weyoun observed through his vessel's sensors with calculating interest. The quantum pulse technique was fascinating, worth reporting to the Founders. If the Federation could weaponize quantum disruption on a larger scale, it could pose problems for the Dominion's own biological weapons programs. Weyoun to Commander Sisko. Congratulations on your apparent success. The Dominion will be interested in your quantum disruption technology. This isn't a weapon to be replicated, Weyoun, Sisko replied tiredly. It's a desperate measure against an extinction-level threat, not a tool for war. Everything is a tool for war, Commander. You of all people should understand that. The channel closed before Sisko could respond. In Cargo Bay 4, the massive Gravemind structure had gone completely still, a monument to defeated consciousness. But within its cellular matrix, microscopic processes continued. Individual flood cells, unable to coordinate with the collective, began operating on more primitive programming: survival, consumption, propagation. They couldn't think, they couldn't plan, but they could evolve. Chief O'Brien initiated the purge protocol section by section. Power relays overloaded in controlled sequences, superheating contaminated areas to temperatures that would incinerate organic matter. In Section 7, the atmosphere ignited in a brief fireball that consumed dormant spores and biomass alike. In Section 12, emergency force fields contained the inferno while it sterilized infected corridors. Worf's security teams moved through the station with flamethrowers, ancient technology, barbaric but effective. They burned every motionless combat form, every infection form, every trace of biomass they could find. The Klingon performed the grim work with methodical thoroughness, understanding that mercy here was measured in certainty, not sentiment. Dr. Bashir coordinated the medical response from his makeshift facility, treating crew members for Nadion exposure, disorientation, and the psychological trauma of watching colleagues transformed into monsters. Counselor Telnori would have months of work ahead, helping survivors process what they'd witnessed. In Ops, Dax monitored the station-wide purge. Benjamin, we're down to 3 contaminated sections remaining: Cargo Bay 4, Section 9, and a small infestation in the lower habitat ring. But Cargo Bay 4 is the problem. The Gravemind's mass is too large to burn quickly. We'll need hours to generate enough heat. Hours we might not have, Kira added, pointing to her tactical display. More ships are arriving. Word has spread about the flood. Every power in the quadrant wants to make sure we've contained it, or wants to study it for themselves. Sisko saw the political disaster brewing. The flood had united enemies in fear, but now that the immediate threat appeared contained, old rivalries would resurface. Everyone would want samples for study, for weaponization, for advantage. Odo, seal all access to contaminated sections. No one in or out without my direct authorization. I don't care if it's Starfleet, Klingons, or the Prophets themselves. Nobody gets flood samples. Before Odo could acknowledge, proximity alarms shrieked. A new vessel had dropped out of warp dangerously close to the station. Aggressive approach, tactical speed, weapons hot. Romulan warbird decloaking, Worf announced. They're hailing us. The view screen activated, showing a Romulan commander Sisko didn't recognize. Cold eyes studied him from beneath severe bangs. Commander Sisko, I am Commander Tomalak. The Romulan Star Empire demands access to the biological samples you've contained. We have the right to defend ourselves against this threat, which requires studying it. Denied, Sisko replied flatly. The flood cannot be controlled or weaponized. We're destroying every trace. You don't have the authority to make that decision for the Quadrant, Tomalak countered. The Tal Shiar insists. A second ship decloaked, Klingon bird of prey, weapons armed. General Martok's scarred face filled half the view screen. The Klingon Empire also demands samples. A warrior must understand his enemy to defeat him. You will provide biological specimens, Sisko, or we will take them. This is not negotiable, Weyoun added from his vessel, his diplomatic tone barely masking threat. The Dominion requires... Enough! Sisko's voice cut through the competing demands. I don't care what your empires require. The flood is being destroyed completely. There will be no samples, no specimens, no further study. We all saw what it did to this station. We watched the Borg run from it. And you want to bring that into your laboratories? Knowledge is power, Commander, Tomalak insisted. The Federation doesn't get to decide. An explosion rocked Deep Space Nine. Emergency klaxons screamed through ops as hull breach alarms activated in Cargo Bay 4. On the tactical display, Sisko saw it immediately. Someone had fired on the station. A precision strike. Surgical targeting, directly at the containment force fields holding the Gravemine's biomass. Who fired? Sisko demanded. Worf checked his sensors, expression darkening. Unknown, Commander. The shot originated from somewhere in the fleet, but sensor interference from multiple cloaked vessels makes identification impossible. Someone wants that containment breach, wants the flood released. The political calculation was brutally clear. Whoever released the flood could claim they were forced to recapture it, giving them excuse to study specimens. Or they could watch DS9 fall and eliminate a strategic Federation asset. Either outcome served someone's interests. Seal Cargo Bay 4, Sisko ordered. Emergency force fields, maximum power. But O'Brien's voice came back with the words Sisko feared. Commander, the explosion damaged the power relays. Force fields are failing. We've got maybe 2 minutes before containment collapses completely. On the view screen, the external view shifted to show Cargo Bay 4's hull breach. Smoke and atmosphere vented into space, and with it, small particles of biomass, flash frozen but intact, spreading into the vacuum around Deep Space Nine. Spreading toward the assembled fleet. The Gravemine's voice suddenly returned, weaker, fragmented, but conscious. Sabo, Taj, Paulie, Tix, you fight each other. We adapt. We survive. Thank you for opportunity. Individual flood cells, exposed to vacuum and radiation, began exhibiting the adaptation that made the parasites so terrifying. Without the Gravemine's coordination, they operated on pure survival instinct, hardening against vacuum, forming protective shells, entering hibernation states that could survive indefinitely in space. And they were drifting towards ships whose crews had no idea what was coming. All vessels, emergency alert, Sisko broadcast on all frequencies. Do not let the biomass touch your hulls. Maintain distance. We have a containment breach. But it was too late. Microscopic spores reached a Bajoran transport whose shields were down for routine maintenance. The spores adhered to the hull, finding microscopic fractures, working their way inside, seeking warmth, seeking hosts. Dr. Bashir watched his sensors with growing horror. "Commander, the flood is adapting at the cellular level. Exposure to hard vacuum has triggered evolutionary responses. It's learning to survive without coordination, without the grave mind. We didn't kill it, we just forced it to evolve." Sisko felt the situation spiraling beyond control. Again, they'd won a battle only to discover they were fighting a war against an enemy that adapted faster than they could respond. "Attention all vessels," he broadcast. "This is Commander Sisko. Implement full biological quarantine protocols immediately. Any ship that has been exposed to flood biomass is to maintain distance from all other vessels and inhabited systems. Anyone who disregards this order threatens every living being in the quadrant." For a moment, the competing factions fell silent. Romulans, Klingons, Dominion, Federation, all united by the realization that their political maneuvering had unleashed exactly what they'd claimed to fear. Then General Martok's voice cut through. "The Bajoran transport Yavanna is reporting medical emergency. 3 crew members showing symptoms of infection. Sisko, your containment has failed. The flood is spreading." And somewhere in the fleet, whoever had fired that initial shot watched with satisfaction as their gambit played out. The flood was loose. Deep Space Nine was compromised, and in the chaos, opportunities would arise for those ruthless enough to seize them. The Gravemind's fragmented consciousness managed one more transmission. "Evolu, Tion, Adapta, Tyan, Sir, Vival, we will consume you all, even Thule." The quantum pulse had won them time. But time, Sisko was learning, was the flood's greatest weapon. Because eventually, everything failed. Everyone made mistakes. And the flood only needed one opportunity to spread. One opportunity they'd just been given. Commander Sisko stood in ops, watching the tactical display as the Yavanna began its death throes. The Bajoran transport's distress signals painted a picture of horror unfolding in real time. 3 infected crew members, containment failing, 27 additional personnel exposed. The ship's captain was making frantic calls for medical assistance that no one could provide. "We have to help them," Kira said, her voice tight with the anguish of watching her people suffer. "They're Bajoran civilians. They didn't ask for this." "Any ship that approaches becomes another vector," Worf countered, his tactical assessment cold but accurate. "We must think of the quadrant, not individual vessels." Sisko felt the familiar crushing weight of command, the calculus of acceptable losses, the mathematics of survival that reduced people to numbers. He'd made these choices during the Dominion War, sacrificing ships and crews for strategic advantage. But this felt different. This felt like surrender. "Captain Yuri," Sisko opened a channel to the Yavanna. "This is Commander Sisko. What's your status?" The Bajoran captain's face appeared on screen. Middle-aged woman, fear barely contained behind professional composure. "Commander, we have 3 confirmed infected in engineering. They've barricaded themselves in, but we can hear them changing. My chief engineer says they're trying to access the warp core. I think they're going to..." The transmission cut to static as an explosion blossomed from the Yavanna's engineering section. The warp core breached in a cascade of matter-antimatter annihilation, and the transport simply ceased to exist, replaced by an expanding sphere of superheated plasma. Captain Yuri had made the only choice that ensured the flood wouldn't spread from her ship. She destroyed herself and everyone aboard. The channel remained open for 3 seconds after the explosion, transmitting nothing but the hiss of ionized particles. Then it closed with a soft electronic tone that sounded obscenely gentle, given what it represented. Kira stood rigid at her station, one hand pressed flat against the console, as if she needed the physical contact to keep from flying apart. 27 Bajorans dead. Good people, trying to rebuild their lives after the occupation, erased in an instant because of contamination from another universe. Scan the debris field, Sisko ordered quietly. Ensure the heat from the warp breach sterilized everything. I want confirmation that no flood biomass survived. Dax worked her science station with hands that trembled slightly. Even her centuries of Trill memories hadn't prepared her for this. Scanning now. The temperatures from the antimatter explosion exceeded 10 million degrees Kelvin. Nothing biological could survive that. The Havana is clean. Clean. Such a sterile word for complete annihilation. Throughout the assembled fleet, the message was received with crystalline clarity. The flood couldn't be contained through conventional quarantine. Infected vessels had to be destroyed immediately, completely, before the contamination could spread. There would be no rescues, no recovery operations, no second chances. General Martok broadcast to all ships. Let it be known, any Klingon vessel showing signs of flood infection will self-destruct rather than dishonor the Empire by spreading this plague. There is glory in sacrifice, honor in protecting one's people. Captain Yuri of Bajor died a warrior's death. We will remember her. On the Romulan warbird, Commander Tomalak issued similar orders to his fleet. The Tal Shiar directs all commanders. Contaminated vessels are to be destroyed without hesitation. Inform your crews. If you show symptoms, you will be vaporized. This is not negotiable. Even Weyun, aboard his Jem'Hadar attack ship, acknowledged the necessity. The Founder's decree. The flood must not reach Dominion space. Any vessel carrying infection will be eliminated. Obedience brings victory. The Quadrant's powers had finally achieved unity through the shared understanding that the flood was a threat requiring measures that violated every principle they claimed to uphold. They would kill their own people, destroy their own ships, abandon their own values to prevent the parasite's spread. The flood had done what the Federation's idealism never could: unite enemies through terror. On Deep Space Nine, Dr. Bashir worked in Science Lab 2, analyzing the sensor data from the Yavana's final moments. His genetically enhanced mind processed the information with inhuman speed, finding patterns that made his blood run cold. "Commander," he said into his comm badge, "I need you to see this. Immediately." Sisko arrived within 2 minutes, finding Bashir hunched over a holographic display showing molecular structures. "What am I looking at, Doctor?" "The flood biomass we detected on the Yavana before its destruction. Commander, the cells had already adapted beyond what I saw in my initial samples. Exposure to vacuum, radiation, the quantum pulse. Each stressor triggered evolutionary responses. The flood on that ship was learning, adapting, becoming more resilient with every challenge we threw at it. Bashir manipulated the display, highlighting specific cellular structures. Look here, these formations didn't exist in the original samples. The flood developed radiation shielding at the molecular level in less than 6 hours. And here, new protein structures that suggest resistance to extreme temperatures. Commander, if we'd tried to use the quantum pulse again, I'm not certain it would work. The flood is evolving defenses." "How is that possible?" Sisko demanded. "Evolution takes generations, millennia. For species that reproduce slowly, yes, but the flood operates on quantum principles. Every cell is simultaneously a sensor, a processor, and a transmitter. It doesn't evolve through natural selection across generations. It evolves in real time through distributed problem solving across billions of cells. Each challenge we present is analyzed simultaneously by the entire infection, and adaptations are implemented immediately." Sisko absorbed this with the grim understanding of a commander facing an unwinnable scenario. You're saying we can't kill it? That every weapon we use just teaches it how to resist that weapon? I'm saying we're fighting an enemy that becomes stronger through combat experience. The Forerunners, the species the Gravemind mentioned, had access to technology millennia beyond ours, and even they couldn't kill the Flood. They had to build the Halo Arrays, weapons that killed all sentient life in the galaxy to starve the Flood of hosts. Genocide as a containment strategy. We're not the Forerunners, Sisko said firmly. And we're not exterminating species to stop this threat. There has to be another way. Before Bashir could respond, Odo's voice crackled through the station's speakers. Security alert. Intruders detected in the lower cargo base. Multiple life signs, moving with purpose toward the contaminated sections. Sisko's jaw clenched. Someone's trying to steal Flood samples. He ran to Ops, arriving to find chaos on the tactical displays. 5 figures in environmental suits had beamed aboard DS9 despite their shields, moving through corridors with military precision toward Cargo Bay 4. Worf's security teams were converging, but the intruders had a head start. How did they get through our shields? Kira demanded. O'Brien checked his readings, expression darkening. They used a Romulan transporter signature with Breen stealth technology and what looks like Dominion security codes. Someone planned this carefully, probably spent months preparing. This wasn't improvised sabotage. This was a coordinated intelligence operation. Identification? Sisko asked. Biosigns are masked, Odo reported. But based on movement patterns and equipment signatures, I'd say Section 31. The name hung in Ops like an accusation. Section 31, Starfleet's unofficial intelligence agency, the organization that did the Federation's dirty work while claiming not to exist. They operated beyond oversight, beyond morality, beyond the ideals the Federation claimed to uphold. And they wanted Flood samples for study, for weaponization. Odo, intercept them, Sisko ordered. Use whatever force necessary. They do not reach the contaminated sections. But even as Odo mobilized, Sisko knew the truth. Section 31 had already won. They wouldn't have risked this operation unless they had a contingency. A second team, a backup plan, something that ensured they got what they came for, regardless of opposition. In Cargo Bay 3, adjacent to the contaminated Bay 4, one of the environmental suited figures produced a device no Federation database would recognize. Forerunner technology, recovered from the debris that had brought the Flood to this universe. Technology specifically designed to contain and transport Flood biomass. The figure activated the device, and a containment beam lanced through the bulkhead into Cargo Bay 4, targeting the dormant Gravemind structure. Microscopic samples of Flood tissue were extracted, sealed in quantum stasis fields that prevented cellular activity, and stored in the device's shielded core. 30 seconds. That's all it took for Section 31 to secure samples of the most dangerous biological threat the Federation had ever encountered. Then they vanished, not through transporter, but through some kind of dimensional shift that sensors couldn't track. One moment they were there, the next they simply weren't. No transporter signature, no warp trail, no evidence they'd ever existed, except for the missing Flood samples. Odo materialized in Cargo Bay 3 seconds too late, his shapeshifter form coalescing from the ventilation system. He studied the room with his security chief's eye, noting the residual energy signatures, the precisely burned hole through the bulkhead, the faint traces of technology that shouldn't exist. Odo to Sisko, they got what they came for. Flood samples are missing. Intruders have vanished. I'm detecting residual quantum tunneling signatures, technology far beyond our current capabilities. In Ops, Sisko felt the last hope of containment slip away. The Flood was no longer isolated to Deep Space Nine. It was out there, in Section 31's hands, being studied, potentially being weaponized. And there was nothing he could do about it, because Section 31 didn't officially exist, which meant he couldn't officially stop them. "Commander," Dax said quietly, "we're receiving a text-only message on a secure channel. No origin signature, completely untraceable." The message appeared on Sisko's personal display. "Commander Sisko, the Federation thanks you for your sacrifice. The samples we acquired will be studied in secure facilities and may provide weapons to defeat the Dominion. Your objections are noted but irrelevant. What we do to ensure humanity survives. Section 31. Sisko stared at the message, feeling rage and helplessness war within him. They were right about one thing. He couldn't stop them. But they were catastrophically wrong about another. The Flood couldn't be controlled or weaponized. It could only consume. And Section 31 had just given it another opportunity. "Delete that message," Sisko ordered, "and increase security protocols across the station. If Section 31 can infiltrate us once, they can do it again." But even as he gave the orders, Sisko knew the truth. The battle for Deep Space Nine was over. They'd won, barely. But the war against the Flood had just expanded beyond his ability to fight it. The parasite was spreading not through infection, but through politics, espionage, and the arrogance of people who thought they could control forces they didn't understand. Outside the station, Admiral Ross's voice came through on Priority Channel. "Commander Sisko, Starfleet Command has reviewed your situation. You are ordered to implement Protocol 077 immediately. Sterilize all contaminated sections, destroy all remaining Flood biomass, and ensure complete eradication. No samples are to be preserved for any reason. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Admiral," Sisko replied, not mentioning that samples had already been stolen by the Admiral's own people who officially didn't exist. "Beginning sterilization procedures now." O'Brien initiated the final purge. Cargo Bay 4's atmosphere superheated to temperatures that would melt steel. The Gravemind's massive structure, already dormant from the quantum pulse, began to burn. For 20 minutes, fusion-level heat reduced the biomass to its component atoms, sterilizing every surface, every molecule, ensuring nothing biological survived. Throughout DS9, contaminated sections received similar treatment. Worf's teams moved methodically, burning every trace of infection they could find. Medical teams scanned every crew member for cellular contamination. Engineering teams purged the environmental systems with radiation that would kill any surviving spores. By hour 36 of the crisis, Deep Space Nine was declared clean. The Flood had been eliminated from the station. But in a laboratory somewhere in Federation space, a facility so classified even Starfleet Command didn't know its location, scientists in biohazard suits studied the samples Section 31 had acquired. They thought they were being careful. They thought their containment was sufficient. They thought they could control the Flood. And somewhere in the quantum entanglement that connected every Flood cell across universes and dimensions, the collective consciousness that had been the Gravemind stirred. Fragmented, diminished, but not dead, never truly dead. Because the Flood was patient. It could wait. It had waited before, contained for 100,000 years on ancient Halo installations. It could wait again. And when the inevitable containment failure occurred, and it would occur because humans always made mistakes eventually, the Flood would be ready. It would consume. It would spread. It would fulfill its only purpose, to end all other life. The Federation had defeated the Flood on Deep Space Nine, but the Flood had already won the larger war, because it was no longer contained to a single station, a single location, a single point of failure. It was everywhere, in samples, in studies, in laboratories, waiting for opportunity. patient as entropy itself. 3 weeks after the containment breach, Commander Benjamin Sisko stood in his office, overlooking the promenade, watching repair crews restore the sections damaged during the purge. Deep Space Nine bore scars, entire decks stripped to bare bulkheads, systems rebuilt from components, corridors still carrying the faint scent of sterilization chemicals. But the station survived. His crew survived. Bajor remained safe. The official casualty report listed 73 dead, 17 from the quantum pulse exposure, 27 aboard the Yavanna, 14 security personnel killed defending against flood combat forms, and 15 civilians who hadn't reached evacuation points in time. 73 names Sisko would carry for the rest of his life, added to the long list of people who died under his command. The unofficial cost was harder to calculate. Chief O'Brien hadn't slept properly in weeks, jumping at shadows, checking biosigns compulsively. Kira attended services at the Bajoran Temple daily, seeking comfort from the prophets for nightmares about her people transformed into monsters. Even Worf, who'd faced death countless times with Klingon stoicism, had become more withdrawn, haunted by the memory of watching colleagues consumed and rewritten. Dr. Bashir entered without knocking. Their friendship had grown past such formalities during the crisis. "You wanted my final medical report." Sisko nodded, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Tell me we're clean, Julian. Tell me there's no dormant infection we missed." "We're clean," Bashir confirmed, but his expression carried uncertainty. "I've screened every person on this station 3 times. No flood cellular structures, no quantum entanglement signatures, no anomalous biological activity. Deep Space Nine is certified free of contamination." He paused. "But Commander, I can't make that same guarantee for the rest of the quadrant." There it was, the truth they'd been dancing around for 3 weeks. The flood samples Section 31 had stolen remained unaccounted for. Starfleet Command claimed ignorance. Admiral Ross had personally assured Sisko that no authorized Federation facility was studying flood specimens. But they both knew what that meant. Whatever Section 31 was doing, they were doing it so far off the books that even Starfleet's highest command didn't have clearance. "I've been analyzing the Gravemind's transmissions," Bashir continued, pulling up data on a pad. "The things it said about the Forerunners, the Halo arrays, the history of the Flood in its native universe. Commander, we got lucky. Extraordinarily lucky. We faced the Flood at its weakest. A single outbreak, limited hosts, no established infrastructure. In its home universe, it had consumed entire civilizations, had access to Forerunner technology, had achieved galactic-scale distribution. We fought the equivalent of a single cell, and we barely survived." "What are you saying, Doctor?" "I'm saying if the Flood ever establishes itself in our universe, truly establishes itself, with time to build defenses and adapt to our technology, we won't survive. The Federation, the Klingons, the Romulans, even the Borg, will all be consumed. Because the Flood doesn't just fight wars, it fights extinction events. And it wins." Sisko absorbed this with the grim acceptance of a commander who'd already calculated those odds. "Then we make sure it never establishes itself. We remain vigilant. We hunt down every sample, every trace, every potential outbreak before it spreads. And if Section 31 succeeds in weaponizing it, if they think they can control the Flood and use it against the Dominion." The question hung between them like an accusation, because they both knew the answer. Section 31 would fail, containment would breach, and the very weapon meant to save the Federation would destroy it instead. "Then we stop them," Sisko said simply. "By any means necessary." A chime at his office door interrupted the conversation. "Come." Odo entered, his usually impassive features showing something like concern. "Commander." There's a situation developing near the wormhole. The Prophets have closed it. Sisko felt his blood chill. The Celestial Temple, the wormhole, had never closed for more than moments in the years since its discovery. The Prophets existed outside linear time, unconcerned with the material universe's immediate crises. For them to seal their temple suggested something had alarmed even beings who perceived past, present, and future simultaneously. "When did this happen?" Sisko demanded, already moving toward Ops. 17 minutes ago. A Bajoran transport attempted passage, and the wormhole simply didn't open. We've tried multiple activation sequences. The Prophets aren't responding. In Ops, the crew worked with controlled urgency. Dax coordinated sensor sweeps of the wormhole's location, searching for anomalies. Kira communicated with Bajoran religious authorities, who reported that the Kai herself had experienced visions of darkness spreading from beyond the Celestial Temple. "Dax, report," Sisko ordered as he took his position at the command center. "The wormhole is definitely closed, Benjamin. I'm detecting residual neutrino emissions consistent with the Prophet's technology, but no response to standard activation protocols. It's like they've sealed themselves off from our universe completely." "Why would they do that?" Kira asked, her faith and duty warring in her expression. "The Prophets have always protected Bajor. Why abandon us now?" Sisko knew the answer before the words formed. The Prophets existed outside time. They'd seen the flood's arrival, witnessed its potential to spread, calculated the threat it posed to all life. And they'd made a decision: isolate themselves and the Gamma Quadrant from the contamination, even if it meant cutting off their beloved Bajor. "They're afraid," Sisko said quietly. "The Prophets encountered the flood through their temporal perception, and they're sealing the Gamma Quadrant to prevent its spread." "Gods don't fear," Kira protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "These ones do. They've seen what the flood becomes if left unchecked, and they've chosen to protect the Gamma Quadrant by isolating it from us." The implications crashed over the Ops crew like a tidal wave. The wormhole had been the Federation's gateway to the Gamma Quadrant, the strategic asset that made Deep Space Nine vital. Without it, the Dominion War's front line shifted dramatically. Supply routes collapsed. Allies became unreachable. The entire political calculus of the Alpha Quadrant changed in an instant. And it was the flood's fault. Or rather, the fear of the flood's potential. Admiral Ross's face appeared on the view screen, his expression grave. "Commander Sisko, Starfleet Command is receiving reports of the wormhole closure from multiple sources. What's your assessment?" "The Prophets have sealed the Celestial Temple, sir. I believe they're responding to the flood threat, protecting the Gamma Quadrant by cutting it off from the Alpha Quadrant." "Can you reopen it? The strategic implications?" "I don't have that authority, Admiral. The Prophets are non-linear beings. They make decisions based on temporal considerations we can't fully understand. If they've closed the wormhole, it's because they've seen futures where keeping it open leads to catastrophe." Ross's shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of command recognizing an immutable reality. "Then we adapt. Deep Space Nine remains strategically important as a border station, but we'll need to reconsider resource allocation. I'll inform Starfleet Command." "Sisko, you did everything you could. The Federation owes you a debt for preventing a galactic catastrophe." "Sir, the flood samples that Section 31 acquired are being handled through appropriate channels," Ross interrupted, his tone making clear the conversation was classified. "You're to cease all investigation into that matter. That's a direct order, Commander." The channel closed before Sisko could protest, leaving him staring at his reflection in the dark view screen. Appropriate channels. Classified operations. The euphemisms of people who thought they were smarter than the consequences of their actions. Dax moved to stand beside him, her ancient Trill wisdom evident in her expression. "Benjamin, there's something else. Before the prophets sealed the wormhole, I detected a brief subspace transmission. It was encrypted in biological substrates, flood communication patterns. Someone or something sent a message through the wormhole before it closed. The Gravemind. But Sisko knew that was impossible. They'd incinerated the Gravemind completely. No, this came from somewhere else, another source." Dax's blue eyes reflected fear. "Benjamin, I think there might be another flood outbreak, somewhere in the Gamma Quadrant, and the prophets sealed the wormhole to contain it." The pieces fell into place with horrifying logic. The Dominion had been collecting intelligence on the flood during the DS9 crisis. They'd witnessed its capabilities, studied its adaptations, and, being the Dominion, they'd probably tried to acquire samples for their own purposes. Changelings could resist flood infection, making them theoretically safe to study the parasite. Theoretically. But theory failed when confronting reality. And somewhere in Dominion space, containment had probably failed. The flood had escaped its laboratory, begun converting Vorta and Jem'Hadar, spreading through the Dominion's territory with exponential efficiency. And the prophets, seeing this through their non-linear perception, had sealed the Gamma Quadrant to prevent the contamination from reaching the Alpha Quadrant. "How bad?" Sisko asked quietly. "I don't know. But the prophets don't make mistakes about temporal mechanics. If they sealed the wormhole, it's because every future where they leave it open ends with the Alpha Quadrant consumed." Kira's comm badge chirped. "Major, we're receiving a priority distress signal. It's from Bajor, the settlement at Ikrami. They're reporting medical emergency. Multiple casualties showing symptoms consistent with rapid cellular transformation." No, it couldn't be. They'd sterilized the station completely. There was no possible contamination vector. Except there was, always was. The flood was microscopic, adaptable, patient. A single spore in someone's uniform, a dormant cell in a ventilation filter, a fragment of infected tissue that survived somehow. All it needed was one oversight, one microscopic failure, one moment of imperfect sterilization. "Quarantine Ikrami immediately," Sisko ordered, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. "Full planetary quarantine protocols, no ships in or out, medical teams in full biohazard gear only." "Benjamin," Dax said softly, "Ikrami is a settlement of 40,000 people. If this is the flood, if containment fails, then we implement the same protocols we used here. Quantum pulse, burn it clean, ensure complete sterilization." Sisko's voice hardened. "And if that fails, we evacuate who we can and orbital bombardment the settlement. I will not let the flood consume Bajor." Kira's face went white. "You're talking about destroying a Bajoran settlement. 40,000 of my people. To save 6 billion, Sisko replied, meeting her eyes with the terrible certainty of command. "That's the mathematics, Major. That's what the flood forces us to become. People who calculate acceptable losses in tens of thousands to prevent losses in billions." For a long moment, Kira stared at him. Then she nodded slowly, recognition dawning that she'd make the same choice. The occupation had taught her that sometimes survival required sacrifices that violated everything you believed. The flood was teaching the Federation the same lesson. Dr. Bashir's voice came through, breathless with urgency. "Sisko, I'm analyzing the distress signal from Ikrami. The cellular transformation patterns match the flood exactly. We have an outbreak on Bajor. I'm preparing quantum disruption protocols and mobilizing medical teams. But Commander, if this spreads beyond the settlement, if it reaches the cities, I know, Doctor. We do this by the numbers. Contain, disrupt, sterilize. Just like here." Sisko turned to his crew, seeing the exhaustion and determination in their faces. We've fought the Flood before. We know its capabilities. We know how to stop it, and we will stop it, because that's what we do. But even as he gave the orders, coordinated the response, and prepared Deep Space Nine's resources for another battle against biological horror, Sisko couldn't escape the truth that the Gravemind had shared weeks ago. We are inevitable. The Flood had been defeated on Deep Space Nine. It would probably be defeated at Ikrami. It might be contained in the Gamma Quadrant, isolated by the Prophet's foresight and sacrifice. But defeats were temporary. Containment was imperfect. Vigilance couldn't be maintained forever. Eventually, tomorrow, next year, next century, someone would make a mistake. A scientist would believe their containment was sufficient. A politician would decide the Flood could be weaponized. The explorer would stumble across dormant spores preserved in the cold void between stars, and the Flood would return, patient as entropy, inevitable as heat death, waiting for opportunity. Because in the end, the Gravemind had been right about one thing. They weren't fighting an enemy they could defeat permanently. They were fighting time itself, and time always won. Sisko stood at his command post, watching his crew coordinate the defense of Bajor, and made a silent promise to the 73 people who died under his command. Their sacrifice would not be wasted. He would fight the Flood every time it emerged, contain it every time it spread, protect the Federation from extinction, no matter the cost. Even if it meant becoming the kind of commander who calculated acceptable losses. Even if it meant abandoning ideals for survival. Even if it meant facing the reality that some threats couldn't be understood or negotiated with, only fought endlessly until either the Flood consumed everything or someone finally found a way to end it permanently. The Flood had entered Star Trek's universe, and nothing would ever be the same. The battle for Deep Space Nine would be recorded in Starfleet archives as a testament to ingenuity under impossible circumstances. The quantum disruption pulse, the coordinated defense, the sacrifices that prevented galactic catastrophe. Dr. Bashir's research would be classified at the highest levels, his methodologies studied by medical and military personnel across the Federation. The station itself became a symbol of resilience, its scarred bulkheads a reminder that some victories came at costs that could be measured in sections destroyed and lives ended. But the larger truth remained hidden in classified files that even admirals couldn't access. The Flood was still out there. In Section 31's laboratories, scientists played with fire they couldn't comprehend. In the sealed Gamma Quadrant, the Dominion fought a war of extinction against an enemy that turned their own soldiers against them. On Bajor, the settlement at Ikrami was sterilized at the cost of 37,000 lives, another sacrifice to contain the unconquerable. The Quadrant's powers had learned what the Forerunners discovered millennia ago. Some threats transcended politics, ideology, and species rivalry. The Flood didn't discriminate between Federation idealism and Klingon honor, between Romulan cunning and Dominion efficiency. It simply consumed, adapted, and waited for the next opportunity. Commander Sisko would spend years hunting outbreaks, coordinating containment protocols, and fighting the secret war against biological extinction that couldn't be discussed in official reports. He would carry the weight of decisions made in extremity, the knowledge that he'd become exactly what Starfleet idealism said he shouldn't be, a commander willing to sacrifice principles for survival. But he would also carry hope, because humanity had faced extinction before, from the Borg, from the Dominion, from their own worst impulses, and survived through cooperation, ingenuity, and the stubborn refusal to surrender to inevitability. The Flood was patient, but so was the Federation. Adaptable, but so were the Quadrant's diverse species. Inevitable, but so was the determination to preserve life against all threats. The prophets watched from outside linear time, their celestial temple sealed against contamination, their beloved Bajor protected by temporal foresight. The Borg remained vigilant, calculating that the flood represented a threat even their collective couldn't assimilate. The Klingons sang songs of Captain Yuri, the Bajoran who died with honor defending her people. And throughout the Alpha Quadrant, every power maintained secret protocols for one scenario. Flood outbreak detected. The Gravemind's final transmission echoed through classified recordings, preserved as both warning and prophecy. We will consume you all, eventually. Eventually. But not today. Not while stations like Deep Space Nine stood watch, commanded by people like Benjamin Sisko, who understood that ideals were worth preserving precisely because they cost so much to maintain. Not while doctors like Julian Bashir studied the enemy with brilliant minds enhanced by genetic mastery. Not while the diverse species of the Federation, Klingon Empire, Romulan Star Empire, and yes, even the Dominion, recognized that some threats demanded unity rather than rivalry. The Flood had entered Star Trek's universe, and it had learned something the Gravemind's ancient consciousness hadn't expected. These beings, these fragile biological entities, with their imperfect governments and philosophical contradictions, possess something the Flood never would. Not just the will to survive, but the determination to ensure others survived with them. Not just the capacity for sacrifice, but the wisdom to know that some things were worth dying for. Not just technological advancement, but the moral evolution that made them more than efficient predators. They possessed hope. Infinite diversity in infinite combinations. The belief that tomorrow could be better than today, that challenges could be overcome through cooperation rather than domination, that life, in all its messy, complicated, imperfect forms, was worth preserving. The Flood was patient, but the Federation was stubborn. And somewhere in the vastness of space, in laboratories and quarantine zones and sealed facilities, the war continued. Not with photon torpedoes and warp-capable fleets, but with microscopes and quantum calculations, and the quiet heroism of scientists who studied nightmares so others could sleep peacefully. The story of Deep Space Nine and the Flood would be told in whispers, in classified briefings, in the careful training protocols that taught every Starfleet officer how to recognize and respond to biological extinction threats. It would shape policy for generations, inform first contact procedures, and remind every commander that sometimes the hardest choice was the only choice that ensured there would be a tomorrow. The Flood had been defeated. Temporarily, at terrible cost, but defeated nonetheless. And as Deep Space Nine's lights glowed against the infinite dark, as its crew returned to their duties of exploration and protection, as the station resumed its role as guardian of Bajor and the now sealed Celestial Temple, one truth remained clear: the Federation would endure. Not because they were stronger than the Flood, or smarter, or more evolved, but because they refused to surrender their principles even when survival demanded compromise, because they calculated the cost of idealism and paid it anyway, because they understood that being human, or Vulcan, or Bajoran, or any of 100 species, meant fighting for more than just existence. It meant fighting for a future worth existing in. To boldly go where no one has gone before. More stories await,